Nancy Drew and the Mystery of the Ghost Maiden. Chapter 1. Nancy Drew slowly awoke to the sound of lovely singing songbirds. She had been dreaming of being on an exciting missing diamond case and hated to wake up. No need to see a psychologist to understand the meaning of that dream, she said aloud before starting to get up. Nancy had been without a case for over a month and desperately craved some excitement and adventure. The same old daily routine was just too boring for her. She needed a break from her mundane reality. Just then her cute little dog, Togo, ran into her room carrying a letter in his mouth. "What's that you have there?" she asked while trying to pet the hyper pet. However, Togo would have none of that because he was in a mood to play. The dog's tail wagged happily as he watched his owner try to pet him on the head. Instead, he tagged her on the leg with his right front paw before running down the long, dark hall to hide. "Not again, boy. Give me a break. I just woke up." "Please God help me wake up," exclaimed the frustrated teen. She peeked into every room starting with the restroom. With the furry nowhere in sight, the girl moved on to her father's bedroom. The door was slightly ajar as she walked into the master bedroom. Nothing seemed amiss at first, however. One of Togo's favorite toys, a stuffed animal in the shape of a squirrel, was laying on the floor on the other side of the room. Nancy raised one eyebrow as she began to take a look around the otherwise spotless room. Her father was a bit of a prick and strictly believes that everything needs to be organized and put away when not in use. The dog was not hiding in the closet or behind any of the furniture. However, when she sat down on the bed the girl heard something. It was the sound of Togo's tail wagging and hitting the hardwood floor. The dog was hiding under her father's queen-size bed with the tip of his furry gray tail just barely sticking out. So she crept up on him from behind and quickly reached under the bed to nab the dog. As he tried to run away, she held him firmly and ticked his soft fluffy belly. "What have you been up to, you silly boy?" Nancy laughed when he managed to land a wet tongue on her cheek to give kisses. When they were finished playing, she reached under the bed and pulled out the letter and looked it over carefully. It was apparently addressed to her father, Carson Drew, from her great-aunt, Betty Barber in Eastdale, a few hours' drive away. She had not seen her mother's only aunt since Nancy was a very small child and now wondered how the elderly woman was getting along in her advanced age. Nancy thought that Aunt Betty must be in her 80s by now. To be honest, Nancy does not remember much about the women, except the lingering smell of peppermint and the fact that she loved to make baked goods. Nancy used to love Aunt Betty's special chocolate chip mint cookies and would ask to take home a box whenever they would go visit her. After getting dressed in a powder blue sundress dress with some fancy white lace trim along the bottom hem, Nancy joined her father at the small kitchen table for breakfast. Hannah had truly been really busy this morning, for she had made not just blueberry pancakes, but also Beacon and Nancy's favorite cheese omelets. Hannah was a housekeeper who had been with them for many years. She was hired shortly after Nancy's mother had died of cancer 10 years ago. And over the years she had become a second mother to Nancy. Nowadays Hannah is considered part of their family and is treated as much. "This looks amazing, Hannah. You must have gotten up really early," Nancy said as she pulled out a chair to sit beside her sire. "Yes, you really have outdone yourself. This is the best breakfast I have had in a long time," Carson complimented, between bites of pancakes. "Oh, it's nothing. I just woke up early this morning but couldn't get back to sleep. I thought it would be nice to do something special for you both," said Hannah with a warm smile. "Thank you so much, Hannah. I don't know what we would do without you," added Carson. "Oh, it is nothing really," Hannah replied before turning around to start the dishes. Nancy cleared her throat to get her father's attention. "Dad, before you go to work, I need to give you this letter." Togo had somehow got a hold of it. Nancy said as she passed him the soiled-looking letter. It must have fallen off the hall table before Togo hid it for a while, said Hannah. Togo did have a bad habit of hiding things, which he seemed to think it was some kind of a fun game. Nancy had lost many pairs of socks and shoes this way over the years. He carefully opened the letter and appeared to study it for a moment. However, he wore a worried look while doing so. "Father, is everything all right?" Nancy asked, confused and slightly worried. "Well, Nancy, I'm not really sure about this letter. It was mailed out 6 months ago and we have not received anything else from her since." "That does not sound good at all," Nancy added as she continued to eat. "Keep in mind that Aunt Betty is a widow with no children to look after her. I feel like someone needs to go check up on her well-being. I would happily go, but my work won't let me right now. This divorce case I'm working on is very time-consuming," Carson said as he rubbed his temples while acting quite stressed. "Father, I can go in your place. I haven't seen her in so long. Just think about it, she's probably lonely and would like to see me." "That sounds like a great idea, however, I'm worried about you going out of town by yourself," replied her father with a tired look in his deep blue eyes. "I'm sure Bess and George will be happy to come along. They love road trips and we can even make a vacation out of it," she exclaimed excitedly with a twinkle in her eye. Carson sat there for a moment in thought before saying, "All right, you won me over. I'll call her at the mansion and set it all up for you. I also think you should stay a full week if you're going to call it a vacation." Nancy got up to give him a small hug before adding, "I will be glad to, Dad. I'll go call them and pass on the news." She leaned over to kiss her dad on the cheek. His stubble tickled Nancy's cheek as she brushed against it.
Chapter 2. Nancy went into her father's office and picked up the antique, black rotary phone before calling one of her best friends, Bess Marvin. The two girls had known each other longer than they could even remember and had been the real close to each other since grade school. "Nancy, I'm so glad you called. I have this guy that's perfect for you," said Bess before Nancy could get a word in. "You know I have Ned," Nancy replied, acting shocked. "But he's off at college right now. I need someone to double date the Duncan twins with. It won't take long to set up a date." Bess whined and pleaded like a small child. Nancy could just picture her pouting. "Bess, please. I don't have time for this, something important has come up." "What can be more important than seeing Chris Duncan?" "Nancy, he almost looks just like Wally on Leave It to Beaver. He is so gorgeous with that wavy golden brown hair, brown puppy dog eyes, the cutest dimples, and those muscles. I just want to melt when thinking of that hunk." "Bess, it's a family issue this time," Nancy assured her. "All right, what's going on? Is it something wrong? No one has died, right?" Bess asked, her interest now piqued. "No, it's just my great-aunt on my mother's side. I'm going to visit her in Eastdale. My father is concerned about her and I think it will be a fun trip for us to go on. She even lives in the old, stately, Davenport mansion that's close to 200 years old." "That does sound like fun. I would love to see what the inside of a real mansion looks like. Just think about how great it may turn out of us there." "When do we leave?" asked Bess, excited. "How about on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock? We'll take my convertible, that will be more fun on a road trip." "All right. See you then, Nancy," answered Bess. "Thanks so much, Bess. We are going to have a great time, I can just feel it," she said before getting off the landline. Then, she picked it back up and called her other friend, George Fane. The phone rang 3 times before anyone answered. "Hello, who is this?" George's mother asked. "Oh, it's just Nancy Drew, is your daughter at home?" "Yes, she just came in from a jog." "I'll get her for you." Give me a few minutes, the older woman replied. After about 5 minutes of waiting, George answered the phone. They talked and laughed. George gladly agreed to go, saying that she was dying for an adventure. The rest of the week went by slowly for all three girls. They couldn't wait to leave on the trip. River Heights is a nice place to live, but it is very boring for its residents. That Saturday around noon, Nancy picked up George first before heading over for Bess. As Nancy pulled into the driveway next to a fine brick house in a middle-class neighborhood, they spotted Bess peeking through the sheer, white, lace curtains. Within a minute she was racing out the door in a cute, ruffled, cream-colored sundress to greet them while pulling a large brown suitcase behind her. That's a lot in there, Bess. We are just saying for a few days, you know, not a month. No need to bring the kitchen sink, exclaimed George. What are you talking about? This is just the first suitcase, there are 2 more inside. Besides, a woman never knows when she might run into a cute guy and be invited to a fancy party or a picnic date. Plus, I want to be on the safe side just in case Nancy's aunt only has fancy sit-down dinners or if the weather changes, replied the blonde teenager. Well, you're on your own carrying this stuff if we have a room upstairs. I don't need to pull a muscle in my back like last time you pull a stunt like this, replied George. Oh, don't worry about that, guys. Although the last time I visited was long ago, I seem to remember that my aunt has a lot of staff, said Nancy, as she smiled. It ended up taking about 25 minutes to rearrange the trunk to get all the stuff to fit. It was worth it all the trouble for Nancy to have all 3 best friends go on a trip together. And it didn't take long once they got on the road, to reach East Dale. It's just about a 4-hour drive from River Heights, following many winding back roads. Chapter 3. The wind felt heavenly to the girls as it played and teased their stylish locks, causing them to giggle randomly. The trio of teens had spent the last hour on the road riding around in Nancy's periwinkle blue, 1959 model Nash Metropolitan convertible. I love your car, Nancy, it is the bomb. Bess commented as she admired the fine interior of the vehicle. She leaned back in her seat casually before adding, you know, this car really does suit you. Your old man chose one the very same color of your eyes, with classic design as well. Nancy quickly glanced over at her friend who was riding shotgun beside her. You really think so, Bess? Why, thank you, that is so insightful. Bess, who are you kidding? There is no way Nancy is going to let you drive so stuff, kissing up to her. George bluntly said from the back seat. Bess turned around to flash her a hateful look on to see her cousin wink in her direction. Grow up, George. The blonde started to say before being interrupted. Now girls, that is enough. Let us just chill for a moment. Nancy demanded. Which way now, George? Nancy asked as they paused at a stop sign. I'm not quite sure. Can we pull over a second for me to figure this out? These directions your dad gave are hard to read with his elaborate handwriting. Sure, I'll pull into this gas station parking lot on the right here, Nancy said as they pulled forward onto the main road before quickly turning into the parking lot. Bess hopped out from the car and ran in quickly to get them a few bottles of pop while the other 2 girls tried to figure out where they were on the map. The store consisted of a small brick building with 2 modern gas pumps stationed out front like guards. Inside, the owner had filled it to the brim with drink coolers and rows of junk food. Vintage folk music played on a small transistor radio behind the counter, giving the place a dated feel. Taking her time looking at the variety of merchandise available, Bess approached the wall or coolers. She paused to decide on what the other girls might like, before grabbing 3 bottles of ice-cold Pepsi and a few bags of potato chips on the way to the counter. An old man dressed in a plain white button-down shirt and faded jeans rang up her items. As Bess was looking at the small variety of magazines on display at the counter, the man spoke, Miss, your total is $2. The girl quickly paid the bill and opened the pop bottles before walking out. Nancy, maybe you can make some sense of this, George said, as she handed her the paper and map. Let's see now, we've already turned left on Hampton Street. Here it just says to keep going straight for a few more miles, then taking a sharp right onto Malone Road. Next, continue on until we come up to the road on the left with twisted willow trees on either side of it, said Nancy as Bess got back into the car. She then handed the girls their drinks before climbing back into the back seat. After riding for another hour, Bess excitedly said, "Right over there. I see something through those trees." As they drove slowly down the old road, two twisted willows came into view. They were almost hidden by the wild overgrown greenery. This is actually kind of pretty with the tall old trees shading the way, the smell of fresh roses in the air, and even the sound of the Smell Creek under us, Nancy said, as they drove over a small wooden bridge. It reminds me of something from a wonderful old novel I read a few years ago, said Bess. She sighed before adding, it was a romance that took place in the deep south and was very steamy. George rolled her eyes at this remark. It didn't take long to reach a large open cast iron gate attached to a matching fence that circled the old mansion. That gate looks so tall like it could even keep a Bigfoot out, remarked George while smirking. Yeah, thank goodness Father phoned ahead that we were coming. If not, we would have had to hunt down a phone ourselves and called them just to get the gate opened, remarked Nancy, as she drove along the old dirt road that led to the estate. As the mansion came into view, Bess exclaimed, "Oh my goodness, how fine. I had no idea the mansion would be this big, just look at all those redbud and oak trees surrounding the house. See all the ivy growing on the left side of the home and the state of some of those trees. They have many half-broken limbs hanging, and that one on the far right looks as if it was hit by lightning," George pointed out. "I wonder what's going on here. This is so very different from all my mother's old photos of this place. The grounds look just lovely in her photo album," thought Nancy aloud. After all the driving and time on the road, the girls were happy to get out of the pale blue convertible and stretch their cramped-up legs. Nancy walked in the door and hit the antique doorbell, as her friends followed close behind. The door was opened right away by a white-haired, pale-skinned butler who seemed to be in his 60s. Dark shadows lurked under his eyes, giving him a ghostly-like appearance. "One of you must be Miss Drew, I presume," said the man while wearing a blank expression. "That would be me," answered Nancy as she walked in. "Right this way," he said while continuing to walk deeper into the house. "Wait, what about our stuff?" asked Bess as she gestured back to the car. "I will tend to it later," replied the old butler in an irritated tone. Bess and George exchanged a glance, neither one caring for his manner. "Now I shall show you to your rooms. Afterward, I will notify my lady that you have arrived." "If you don't mind me asking why we can't go see her right now instead?" asked George. There was a long pause before he answered, "My lady had just retired to bed for a nap, shortly before you arrived. I refused to wake her so soon. This reminds me of something that would happen on the Addams Family TV show," whispered Bess to her friends as they giggled to themselves. Chapter 4. The strange man led them deep inside the estate and up to a large grand staircase that was carpeted in a rich shade of red. For the most part, it was dimly lit with very little light shining through the dark curtains shrouding every window. They passed many rooms before heading down a long bare hallway and into a bedroom. As the girls walked in, they noticed that the room was small but beautifully staged. An ornate chandelier hung from the ceiling, elegant French-style furniture filled the room, and the walls were painted a warm cream tint to match the theme of the room. Over by the bed was a door that led to the small private bathroom. "This room shall be Miss Drew's, and the one across the hall shall be for her two guests." The man turned to leave and shut the doors quietly behind him, leaving the girls alone. "Everything in this room looks so fancy that I feel out of place. I'm afraid to touch anything in case I might break it," George said as she paced the room. I feel the same way, but I'm sure my aunt would want us to feel right at home here, replied Nancy, as she studied some old photo frames that hung on the walls. Well, we might as well start unpacking all of our stuff, that way maybe we can go explore the house later. I wonder if this place has a grand ballroom? Questioned Bess. I really have no idea, Bess. Nancy answered, if there is it must not ever be used. Nancy walked over to her door and tried to open it, however, the door was stuck. The door frame must be warped, she thought. With a hard push, she was able to get it open to let her friends step out, with Nancy following close behind. Their room was twice the size of Nancy's, with a massive king-size bed in the center. The suite had a 10-foot ceiling with fancy crown molding. It had a warm color palette with basic oak furniture scattered around. As they walked in, a built-in bookcase was nested in the right wall, featuring a few glass collectibles. Well, I guess we need to start unpacking, George said as the butler toted their stuff in. Nancy took this as her cue to leave. Over in her own room, Nancy made herself comfortable. Just the perfect place to rest and read a nice long classic book, thought Nancy as she yawned and grabbed Pride and Prejudice from her pale blue suitcase. She was able to read a few chapters before slowly falling to sleep. An hour later, a sudden loud knocking sound awoke Nancy from her light nap. When she turned in the direction of the door, she saw a petite young maid with glasses peering sheepishly at her from the half-opened the door. I really didn't mean to wake you, miss. I'm very sorry to bother you, however, the cook sent me to fetch you for dinner, she said shyly. You're the maid. What about my friends? Yes, ma'am. I just spoke to them, as well. Just try to be down in 10 minutes, please. Our cook gets mighty cross if her cooking gets cold, replied the meek servant, before she slowly closed the heavy door. That poor girl seems scared of her own shadow, thought Nancy to herself, as she stretched, yawned, and started to get out of the soft feather bed. She looked over at the alarm clock to see that it was 7:45 p.m. She had taken a 4-hour nap. Oh, how the time does fly when you've been traveling, she commented. Chapter 5. Nancy, you won't believe it, cried Bess as she burst into the room, obviously upset about something. What happened, Bess? Has there been a bad accident of any kind? Asked Nancy. Yes, there has been. It's my white lace gown and it's ruined, the girl said between sobs. Is that all? Whoa, that's a relief, thought Nancy before she asked, how could that have happened? It's been in your suitcase most of the day, hasn't it? Nancy replied. I must have packed some bright red lipstick in that suitcase by accident, and now the tube has come open, making the lipstick smear all over the gown, Bess answered. It's all right, we can get you another one later in town. It's not that big of a deal, Bess. No need to worry about it so much, Nancy assured, trying her best to calm the girl. No, you don't understand. We can't replace it because that was an old vintage dress of my grandmother's. That dress must be close to 50 years old. Oh, Nancy, there's no way, she will never forgive me. She wore that dress on the day she met my grandfather at the church picnic many years ago. Bess whined as she continued to shed a stream of tears. Oh, please calm down, why don't we take it down with us and see if someone here can try to get the stains out? I've heard that a lot of the staff on large estates like this one can do miracles when it comes to cleaning. I'm sure somebody here knows lots of cleaning tips and tricks that might help with this problem, Nancy said, then she hugged Bess, trying to soothe her. Yeah, you never know unless you try. I do think we need to get going unless we intend to be late for dinner, added George, not caring much for Bess's dramatics. All right, but I'm afraid that I've lost my appetite from all this, Bess replied, as she started to calm down. Don't be so sure about that. I'm pretty sure it's roast beef and rolls that I smell cooking, George said, already drooling slightly. Really, that sounds so good, maybe I can get down just a little if I try, confirmed Bess. Once they reached the bottom of the grand old staircase, they spotted the butler waiting on them. He eyed Bess and the dress, in a questioning way with one eyebrow raised. "I'm afraid this dress accidentally got stained and we were wondering if anyone here could clean it for us," asked Nancy. "Well, I suppose Emily could find a way to handle it somehow," he answered back in a bothered way, as he carried it carelessly away. "Did you notice the strange way he was staring at me?" asked Bess once the butler was out of earshot. "Must be because of your face looking so pink from all that crying," answered Nancy. "I wonder which way the dining room is." "I'm feeling so hungry I could eat a horse," asked George. "That's an easy one to answer. All you need to do is just follow your nose," piped in Bess, when she led the way towards the left of the home and into the large fancy dining room. The walls were covered in wood paneling and from the ceiling, a large crystal chandelier hung right above a long table made to seat 10. As they walked in they spotted a little old lady sitting at the end of the long wooden table. She looked to be around 80 years old, had a small frame, her hair was up in an old-fashioned style bun and had soft gray eyes. "Nancy, it's so nice to see you again after so long," said the woman, as she came over to Nancy and her friends. "You've grown up to be so lovely and look so much like your sweet mother." "Oh, how I've missed seeing you both so much these past few years," she whispered, as they hugged. As they pulled away Nancy could see some tears in her caring eyes. "These are my best friends from back home in River Heights, Bess and George. So nice to meet both of you. However, I do think we should have a seat and eat before this pot roast gets cold," suggested the elderly woman. "This looks so yummy," Bess exclaimed, as she looked upon the large pot roast, mashed potatoes, garden greens, and yeast rolls spread out across the table. "What have you girls been up to here lately?" asked the aunt. "I've mostly just active stuff like marathon training and volunteering at the local food bank," answered George. "I've been learning how to sew and quilt from my grandmother," piped in Bess. "How about you, Nancy?" George asked. "Well, lots of things. Along with volunteering at the library, helping my father, and reading, I've been solving mysteries around town," Nancy replied. "What kind of mysteries, dear?" asked Aunt Betty, showing concern. "All kinds of mysteries. The last case was involved in a whispering statue," Bess said. "However, it, of course, didn't really whisper. It had holes drilled in it that allowed the statue to make sounds when the wind blew through it," added in Bess. "That's quite impressive, Nancy, but do make sure to be careful. I care and worry about you an awful lot." "Yes, I do understand. Father tells me the same thing all the time," Nancy replied. "Oh, don't worry, ma'am," George added with a wink. "Nancy is safe with us, we will never let anyone ever harm her." Chapter 6. After halfway finishing eating the meal, Nancy asked her aunt, "Was there a very bad storm around here, lately? It looks like it. There has been one recently, from the state of your yard. There was a really bad thunderstorm with high winds last month, that did a lot of damage. I know the cleanup should have been taken care of already. Unfortunately, my landscaper decided to quit, and I've been unable to find a replacement for him," explained the Aunt Betty. "What happened that was so bad that made him quit?" asked Bess. "Quite honestly, it's not worth talking about, so let's just forget about it, for now, girls," the aunt replied. Nancy and her friends glanced at the women with questioning looks but received no further answer from her. After dinner, she led the group of young girls into a small sitting parlor with a large TV set in it. "You can watch what you want, girls. I'm just going to sit down here and work on my knitting. I'm trying to finish up this gray throw blanket. It's a gift for our church pastor. He's getting up in years and tends to stay cold, so he needs one of his own." "What's he like?" asked Bess. "He's a kind man but very quiet. He is also a veteran in his 70s and is soon to retire from preaching," answered the aunt. The girls found the old TV to have poor reception. After messing with it for a while, they managed to find a station that had an I Love Lucy marathon airing on it. They all enjoyed watching it and laughing together all the way up until 10 o'clock that night. Their favorite episode was the Chocolate Factory, one where Lucy must get a job. After turning off the TV, the girls helped Aunt Betty up the stairs to her room, which was on the other side of the house. When Nancy got back to her room, she went into the bathroom and ran a bubble bath. It didn't take Nancy long to find her shampoo and body wash in her suitcase. She enjoyed relaxing in the warm bath. It felt refreshing to feel her stress and worries melt away. As she was lathering her hair, Nancy heard a strange sound outside and jumped, getting soap all in her eyes. Grabbing a towel, she washed her eyes out. But when the teen peeked out the window, there was not a soul in sight. Must have been some animal, Nancy thought as she got back into the bathtub. That night, despite the soft feather mattress, the girl had a lot of trouble falling asleep. She kept awakening to whispering sounds that stopped as soon as she sat up. The young girl also felt like she was being watched. She wanted to investigate but was far too tired to get up at all. Nancy tried to figure out which direction the sounds were coming from but could not in her state of overwhelming fatigue. She finally drifted off to sleep but had very strange dreams that made no sense whatsoever. "Nancy, where are you? Are you even up yet?" asked Bess, when she came into the bedroom the next morning. "No, I just want to sleep a while longer. It's still dark outside, Bess, and I'm really exhausted." Nancy whined like a small child. "It's dark outside because of a storm cloud. It's almost 11 a.m. You slept so long that you missed breakfast," the blonde said as she grabbed a hold of the edge of the soft cotton comforter. She pulled very hard and managed to get the covers off her sleepy friend. "No, Bess, I feel so cold. Please let me sleep another hour," begged Nancy before she also grabbed the blanket. The two girls ended up having a very weird tug-of-war fight over it. With one final yank, Bess pulled the blanket away and carried it quickly into her own room. Once the girl came back into the room, she noticed Nancy brushing out her strawberry blonde hair while sitting at the cream-colored vanity. "It wasn't easy to wake you, but at least you're up now. You normally wake up before me, so why are you so tired? Did you have nightmares all night?" Bess asked, feeling a bit concerned. "Well, that's not exactly what went on," Nancy said when she looked through the dresser trying to pick out something to change into. "Then what did happen last night?" asked her young friend as she sat down on the unmade bed. "You might think I'm crazy, but I heard voices coming from in the walls last night," Nancy said with a very confused look on her face. "Are you sure you didn't dream it, or perhaps it was mice making strange noises in the walls?" Bess questioned, not taking her fired, not reading too much into the subject. "I'm sure I heard people whispering back and forth. The weirdest thing was that every time I would sit up or turn over, the sounds would stop. It was as if I was being watched," added Nancy as she walked over to sit next to her best friend. "It sounds like a ghost. I'm ready to leave now if it's that. I'm terrified of ghosts," Bess shouted almost in a complete panic as she began to nervously chew on her own fingernails, an old habit from childhood. "I don't think so, Bess," Nancy commented while shaking her back and forth. She leaned forward to lock eyes with Bess. "There has to be something more going on in this house. I can sense a mystery hidden here." Bess broke eye contact and lied back on the soft feather bed. Her eyes were gazing up at the crown molding around the ceiling as she replied, "You do have a way sniffing out mysteries. You are almost like a bloodhound." She glanced over at her friend while a small smile on her lips as she said, "Here we go again. I have got your back, Nancy." Just then George came into the room and was filled in on the details. "I wonder if these old painted wall panels hold a secret," Nancy asked, then she started tapping on the walls. "Why are you doing that?" asked George with a look of confusion on her face. I'm looking for a hidden door or some sort of passageway. There has to be something behind one of these walls. She held a high-heeled shoe to use as a tool for tapping on the walls. Nancy was trying to find a hollow place hidden behind the wall, by listening for an echo from the tapping. Even if there is a hidden room, how would they be able to see you? Asked Bess, being a little too critical. I'm not quite sure about that yet. But there must be an explanation. Perhaps, a spyglass of some sort, who really knows? I just need some clues to figure this out. They made the secret door that cracked open at night, for spying on you. It gets really dark out in the country like this, so you wouldn't be able to see it with the lights out, added George as she continued to watch Nancy performing the experiment. Right here, listen to the right wall, sounds different. I think that there must be something behind here. Help me try to find a switch or lever to open a secret door. Exclaimed Nancy as she waved them over. The section was about 5 feet wide by 6 foot wide with nothing blocking it but a small table. Nancy noted that the table was mounted to the wall and appeared to touch the floor, making this the perfect entrance for a hidden passage. The three girls searched for over an hour, by pulling on every book, moving the furniture, looked behind the paintings, and even examined the painted paneled walls for hidden buttons. Despite their efforts, they could not find anything that would open a doorway. Nancy started at the wall, feeling perplexed. Let's try the next room over, George suggested, feeling very discouraged by the lack of results for their efforts.
Chapter 7. The next room they entered turned out to be an old office with just an old, heavy desk, chair, and half-empty bookcases. What do we do now? Asked George as she leaned against a paneled wall. First we'll go get something quick to eat, rest a little bit, and then we'll have a little heart-to-heart with my Aunt Betty. If we have enough time later, we'll examine these bookcases in detail for a hidden entrance, answered Nancy before they left the bedroom and headed down the stairs. Turkey sandwiches on rye, Granny Smith apple slices, walnut brownies, and a tall cold glass of milk awaited the girls when they entered the dining room this time. As Nancy glanced around the room, she noticed that her aunt was not there. When the butler came to check on them, Nancy asked, "Where is my aunt? I would like to see her." "She left an hour ago to go to a doctor's appointment in River Heights. She should be back in 2 to 3 hours at the most," the butler replied as he began to clean up the kitchen. "I sure hope that she gets home soon by the look of those storm clouds," added George as it started to rain outside. The three girls ate their lunch quietly as they waited to question Nancy's great-aunt. The house felt strange and eerie to them during the storm. The wind whistled and blew tree limbs, which created hunting shadows throughout the home. They were almost scared to death when they heard the phone ring in the sitting parlor. Nancy raced into the room to pick up the phone. "Hello there, this is Nancy Drew." "Nancy. This is Aunt Betty. I'm so sorry, but I'm going to have to come home tomorrow. The storm is just too strong for traveling right now. I tried to make it home but had to turn back an hour ago. Some of the roads are flooded and others are blocked by fallen trees." "I'm so glad you're all right, but where will you stay?" asked Nancy. "I happened to stumble upon a quaint little inn, so we're going to stay at it for the night. I'll be home sometime tomorrow," replied her aunt. "All right, thanks for calling, we were so worried," Nancy stated. "That's understandable, but I must go, someone else is waiting to use the phone." "I love you, Nancy, be safe." "Love you too, bye," said Nancy as she hung up the phone. "My aunt is going to have to stay at an inn for the night. She said the storm was just too bad to drive home," worried Nancy. "That's good to hear, at least she's all right," replied Bess as George nodded in agreement. The girls head up to Nancy's room where they played cards for a while. They also talked about the cute boys they had seen when they drove through town. Bess had taken quite a fancy to a young guy with curly blonde hair she had seen standing outside a small cafe. "I sure do hope to run into him again. He's so darn cute, he made my knees shake." Bess said and then sighed as she thought of him. Leave it you to find a new crush on the very first day of the trip. You are so boy crazy, added in George as she rolled her eyes. Now, I saw you staring at that tall, brown-eyed, well-built guy at the gas station where we made a pit stop at, Bess replied, as George blushed. Then they all started giggling until their tummies started to hurt. Just then the lights flicker a few times as if the power was about to go out and leave them in the dark. It wasn't long before the girls could hear it pouring outside and thundering loudly. They tried the old television, but it couldn't even get a signal with all the wind howling outside. We're safe inside, here right? Asked Bess as she pulled a warm throw blanket around her small frame. I'm sure we are. This old house has been here for 100 years and still stands strong. I'm also sure my aunt wouldn't live in an unsafe house, answered Nancy as she looked out the window. It looked even darker outside, but she could still make out the top of the trees that seemed to be swirling from the strong gusts of wind. To get our minds off this storm and keep our sanity, why don't we go investigate that office now? We have nothing better to do anyway, suggested George to her friends. Great idea, but first let me go get my flashlight out of my suitcase, just in case we need it. I don't want to get lost in this house if the power goes out, answered Nancy. Yeah, it's creepy enough here with the lights on during this storm, Bess said as they went to Nancy's room. It didn't take Nancy long to find her trusty flashlight that was on the nightstand. Then they went into the office. George and Nancy looked through the old books. They turned out to be mostly just old law books, but they kept trying to see if pulling on one would trigger a door to open. Unfortunately, all the dust on the books kept making George sneeze as she searched. Bess slowly went through the wooden desk to find piles of old bills from almost 30 years before. What a mess. This stuff is useless. She continued to go through the drawers and noticed something shiny under the desk. So, she crawled underneath it to find that it was just a shiny chewing gum wrapper. Just then there was a loud crack of thunder and a flash of lighting that made Bess jump up and hit her head on the desk. When her friends heard the cry out in pain, they came to see what had happened. I'm fine, just bumped my head. I'll be alright, said Bess, as she rubbed the bump on her head. Look, there's a piece of the desk sticking out, pointed out Nancy. When she touched it seemed to move slightly. So, she pulled gently on it to reveal a hidden drawer. At first, it looked like there was nothing in the drawer but a thin layer of dust. Nancy checked it out thoroughly and found what looked like a few old, yellowed letters and some scraps of lace. When she opened the letters, most of the ink had faded badly with time, but they were mostly unreadable. However, she could still read some parts of the letters. These must be old love letters, because they are addressed to, my sweet Heather, Heather, my love, and dearest love. Wow. These are ancient. Look right here at the top. These are dated way back from 1843 through 1845. Nancy exclaimed loudly to her friends, showing excitement. That's just over 100 years ago, exclaimed George. That is so romantic. The very last thing I expected to find in there. I was just thinking more old books or more candy wrappers would be in there, added Bess as she grabbed a few letters to look at. But why would old love letters be hidden away in a secret drawer in the first place? Nancy asked her friends. Perhaps it was a forbidden love like Romeo and Juliet, or maybe even an affair, said Bess. Maybe, but I think there is more to this than something as simple as that. I really need to ask my aunt about this. Nancy replied. It seems to get pretty late. My watch reads 8 o'clock, pointed out George to her friends. Hey, listen, girls, it sounds like the storm is also calming down, cut in Bess, as her stomach growled very loudly. That must be the idea to check on our dinner. It should be done cooking soon. I'll go through these letters to bed, said Nancy, before she went into her room to put the letters on the nightstand. It was a good thing that the girls did not have to wait long for dinner that night. It consisted of wonderful tasting beef stew, softy buttery rolls, and a fresh green salad. By the time they had finished eating, the storm had died down to just a drizzle. The sound of the light rain helps both Bess and George fall asleep quickly. Nancy had decided to stay up and try to make some sense of the letters and write notes in her blue notebook. She was almost finished reading the letters around midnight, when a piano started to play, faintly in the background.
Chapter 8. Being an amateur detective, Nancy could not resist investigating the strange noise. After digging through her handbag for a flashlight, the teen girl entered the dimly lighted hallway, entranced the sound of the music. It sounded otherworldly but somehow familiar. Where had he heard that tune before? It led her up to another stairway to the third floor. The steps creaked under her weight as she ascended them. Once she reached the top, she found a dark hallway that looked very neglected and with wallpaper was peeling off the walls in large sections. The carpet on the floor was old and ratty, and the only wall sconce had a broken light bulb making it useless. As she continued to walk down the barren hall, the eerie music grew fainter before suddenly stopping. Nancy stepped forward and tried the doors in the hall. Two of them were locked, one led up to the attic, another was a storage room, the last was an old-fashioned music room. This room looked abandoned, as well. It had moth-eaten sheer curtains, the faded mint-colored wallpaper was peeling off the wall, also there was a thick layer of dust and rubble covering everything in the room. The only furniture that was left in the room was a little wooden chair and an antique-looking baby grand piano was in the middle of the room. Nancy noticed that some of the piano keys were dust-free, proving someone had been in here quite recently. She checked behind the curtains to make sure no one was hiding but found nothing. Nancy scratched her head in confusion, knowing there had to be a logical answer to where the musician had gone. The person could not just disappear into thin air, that is impossible. Finding the search fruitless, she made her way carefully back to her own room. She got under the thick covers and got comfortable. Then, she reached over to the nightstand for her notebook and the letters to find them both gone. She realized that the piano music had obviously been aroused to draw Nancy out of the room. The letters must have been important, with perhaps a clue to this mystery. This girl surrendered to sleep but was determined to work on this more in the morning. That night she dreamed of her cute, college boyfriend, Ned Nickerson. She was at prom and was wearing a long turquoise-colored gown with white lace across the bodice. Around her neck was a single string of pearls that matched her earrings. She felt very nervous and had trouble speaking clearly to the people who greeted her. If only someone was here I know, she thought to herself. Nancy felt very out of place here. Watching all the other young girls with their dates dancing made her heart ache. Oh, why did Ned have to choose to attend a college out of town, she asked herself while pouting in a childlike manner. Nancy continued to walk around and study the strangely blurred faces in the crowd, then out of nowhere, she tripped. It felt like some sort of forced plotline to the teen, however, just as she was about to hit the hard floor, falling face first, someone caught her. Looking up, Nancy saw the cute smile and twinkling eyes of Ned, who was wearing a stylish suit. He looked way beyond handsome, with his golden brown hair, sparkling blue eyes just made Nancy melt. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek gently to thank him. He smiled wide, took her hand in his, and asked her to dance. She replied with just a nod and a smile. They slow danced together to the song, Sandman, while Nancy grinned and blushed. She felt so giddy, excited, and shy all at the same time. The girl could not help but wish the night would never, ever end. He led her out into a rose garden where they danced again with the lovely fragrance of the flowers swirling around them. When Nancy looked up, she noticed a shooting star that raced across the starry night sky. Closing her eyes, she wished to be with her sweet Ned forever. She started to wake, then she realized that she was in a dream. Ned slowly started to lean in forward to kiss, but right at that moment, she woke up. Frustrated, she groaned loudly in frustration and pulled the covers over her head. Chapter 9. The next morning Nancy searched her room, making sure the love letters had not fallen behind or under the furniture. As she had expected, they were not there. This confirmed the theory that a thief must have taken them the previous night. With little else she could do, Nancy picked up a notebook and wrote down what little she could remember from the letters. Looking over the notes didn't help her much at all. There were just too many missing pieces to figure it out. Nancy pondered, I sure do hope my aunt can help us with some clues. Afterward, she got dressed in a cute white pleated skirt and a purple top. However, when she went over to grab her purple shoes, she stepped on something sharp. Quickly Nancy looked downward where she saw a single press-on fingernail painted with bright red nail polish. Nancy thought this might be an important clue, so she went over to her friend's room quickly to show them. When Nancy entered, she was greeted by Bess, who was inspecting her vintage dress with a full-body mirror. Nancy, by some miracle they fixed my grandmother's dress. It looks just like new now, exclaimed Bess. That's great, Bess, but do you really want to wear it today? It might get stained again, commented Nancy. Oh no, silly, I was just making sure it had not shrunk from being washed. I am going to be wearing my pale peach dress today, continued Bess. Nancy asked, by the way, is either of you missing a red press-on fingernail? No, not me. I don't even bother with my fingernails, replied George as she lay on the bed. George, you are so silly, and red is not my color. Bess laughed. It can't be the maid's either. She is very shy and is not the type they wear flashy nails to draw attention to herself. Must be from last night, then. Nancy exclaimed loudly. What do you mean from last night? Inquired Bess, as she fixed her hair, slowly taking it out of curlers. You see, last night the old letters and my notes were stolen, when I went to investigate some strange piano music. This nail must be from the person who took it, Nancy stated. What does that prove, and what strange music are you talking about? Asked George, confused. A woman was in my room, based on this clue. Perhaps it might be helpful to look for someone missing a red nail, Nancy said as she went over to help Bess pull out what was left of the hair curlers. What did you find out about the strange noise then? Asked Bess as she turned back the mirrored vanity to comb the tight, blonde curls out. Nancy answered, not much at all. It led me up to the third floor where an astonishing-looking music room was located. However, no one was in there when I checked, Nancy stated. Could it have been a ghost then? Bess thought aloud. I don't think so, there was some evidence of someone recently being there. I found the whole entire room was covered with a layer of dust, except for a few piano keys, Nancy replied, as they went downstairs for breakfast. Just then a car horn sounded. The three girls raced to the nearest window to see Nancy's great-aunt driving up to the large home. Maybe now we can get some answers to all these new questions, Nancy said as they went downstairs. But once they got near the bottom of the stairs, arguing began outside. When she opened the front door, she was shocked to see her aunt arguing with a gray-haired, large-frame, middle-aged man. The argument between the two started, you know it, as well as I do, Betty. You don't have the funds to stay in this house much longer. You should sell it to me and move away before they force you into a retirement home, argued the man. No, I have lived here for over 40 years and refuse to give it up. I promised my dear departed husband that I would never sell his childhood home, answered the old woman as she began to tremble from the stress. You are too old to make sound decisions, old woman, he yelled, just before he threw a coffee mug down, shattering it into hundreds of pieces. Leave. You are not welcome here, shouted another woman, as she ran out of the house with a spoon in her hand. She was a stout woman, with salt and pepper hair, and sad eyes. Pointing it at the man she yelled, I've already called the police, Harold. They are on their way. Fine then, I'll buy this place from the government when they take it away from you for all the back taxes. Mark my words, I will turn this place into a 5-star resort. The man spouted, just before he sped away in a very expensive-looking, silver, sports car. The girls felt overwhelmed, as he disappeared into the distance. When the shock had left them, they ran over to where the elderly women were. "Cookie, help me," yelled the old women. Cookie and Nancy helped Aunt Betty into the sitting room where she sat on the couch and rested. Afterward, Cookie made her some jasmine tea, before she went back to her work. "Thank God for Cookie, she is the only one who can handle her older brother Harold," said the stressed old woman, as she sipped the steaming tea. "Who is Cookie?" Nancy asked the old lady. "She's my chef and has become my protector. As you can see, her older brother is completely insane. He is a selfish, greedy, ill man with no respect for others. It is very hard to believe that those two are even related," explained Aunt Betty as she rubbed her temples, trying to ease a headache brought on the commotion. "This all started 5 years ago, right after my husband passed away from a very aggressive form of cancer." "What exactly is going on here?" Nancy asked as she bends down to hold Betty's hand in support. "I should have told you this sooner. You see, when my dear husband, Andy, was very ill, we spent most of our fortune on his health care, and now I almost have nothing left to live on," cried the lady in sorrow. "You precious lady, how have you gotten by for the past 3 years with no money?" Nancy inquired. "By selling off most of the land that we had, my jewelry, and most of the antiques. I also let most of the help go except for who was really needed. The money for all that was enough to pay for everything until this year's taxes were billed. Unfortunately, there is nothing left to the sale of great value, except for this house which I promised not to ever sell. I would hate to leave this place with all the great memories it holds, so dear to me." "Is that why the landscaper left, due to lack of funds?" asked Nancy. "No, that wasn't the reason, but I rarely had him come by anymore, except when the grounds looked disastrous," the old lady explained. "Then what did happen?" Nancy asked. The old woman paused before she leaned forward whispering, "He saw her outside in the garden." "Who did he see exactly?" asked Nancy, feeling puzzled. "Heather Blackwell, the ghost that haunts the 3rd floor of this home," she answered, barely audible pitch. "This place is haunted? You never told me that," Nancy asked as her eyes twinkled with delight. "I didn't want to. I was afraid it would scare you off or that you might think that I was crazy," softly spoke the old lady. "Please tell me more," said Nancy with a curious sparkle in her blue eyes. Chapter 10. I didn't believe any of this when my husband and I first moved here. However, I will tell you the old family legend passed down for generations. Over 100 years ago, my husband's great-grandfather, Albert, had a daughter named Heather. She was said to be very pretty, kind, bright, and very musical. Heather was his favorite child, because of how much she favored her deceased mother. From her, the girl inherited striking beauty and a witty personality. Her father spoiled the child with everything she ever wanted. He even had a music room built to give her a creative outlet. When Heather was 19 years old, she met a young sea captain, Ernest Brown. It was not long before the two of them fell madly in love. They became engaged and was due to be married in 5 months. But the young man had to go back out to sea one last time before he could retire to a new line of work, as a banker. There was a bad storm which swept him overboard. Unfortunately, he was never to be seen again. It took 5 months for the news to get back, but by then the young lady had died of scarlet fever. The story goes that she still waits for him on the top floor, to return. "But did you say that you didn't believe it at first?" Nancy asked. "Well, my husband's family has always claimed that strange things happen in this home. Things such as hearing her singing coming from upstairs, strange noises, floating objects, the lights flickering, candles going out, and seeing glances of her. What convinced me was when we were coming home from a party. As we drove up the driveway, I had a glimpse of her up on the third-floor balcony. She was just standing there leaning on the railing and looking out towards the sea. Thank God she has never been seen outside of the third floor for all these many years, at least, until the gardener saw her, that is, said the woman with a tired look on her aged face. For several seconds, Nancy stared at her aunt in disbelief. This new information was sure to scare Bess if she ever learned the old mansion was haunted. She would just have to keep this to herself for the time being. After leaving the sitting room, she was lost in thought while walking through the corridors. Her young mind was so full of questions. Instead of helping Nancy, what her aunt had told her only seemed to confuse her even more. Nancy didn't believe in ghosts, however, that would be a good answer for what had caused the strange happenings. If the ghost was real, why did the letters disappear? Come on, Nancy, think. There is a logical answer here somewhere, she said to herself, before almost walking right into a wall from being so deep in thought. She had just begun to awaken from a deep trance when she looked around to find herself in a part of the home that she had never been to before. She really had no idea how she had come upon this hallway. It was brightly lit from a large stained glass window that had birds in flight design on it. I wonder how old this window is. It seems to be made with a more masculine design in mind. Nancy mumbled. All the other stained glass windows she had seen in the home had flowers designs like roses and lilies. She walked closer to get a better look in the background. Behind the birds looked to be chapel. She ran her hand over the colored glass. It was spotless, and she could feel the different textures of the glass. But something felt off about the last piece of glass. It almost felt like something was scraped into it. I know I have a pencil and some paper in my purse somewhere, Nancy thought as she tried to dig through her bag. Note to self, I must remember to empty this thing out later. It's so full of receipts and makeup that I rarely even wear anymore. Just as she was about to dump the bag's contents onto the floor, she felt a pencil inside a side pocket. She used the pencil and a receipt for the paper. She went gently over the piece of glass to copy the texture. She could tell something was hidden here. A few feet away, a sound started coming from behind a door. It sounded like bumping and scratching noises. Taking a few steps closer, she reached the door. She reached out her hand to turn the knob when she heard a scream. That sounded like Bess, she said before forgetting all about the door and running toward the sound of her friend's screams. Chapter 11. When Nancy went to investigate, she found Bess sitting at the top of the stairs crying into her hands. The girl's makeup was messed up from all the crying and Nancy almost didn't recognize her. Bess, what happened? It sounded like you were screaming bloody murder, Nancy asked as she sat down next to her friend. It's gone, Nancy, and was never going to find it, Bess said as she continued sobbing. What's gone, Bess? I can't help if you don't tell me what happened. My birthday present, Bess answered. Do you mean the radio you got as a birthday gift last month? Nancy continued. No, Nancy, it is my locket that is gone. The rose gold one with the filigree design on top. Have you checked your room from top to bottom? George spoke up as she entered the hallway. We both practically tore this room apart and found nothing. With a look of confusion, Nancy turned back to Bess. When did you last have it? That was last night. I can remember feeling exhausted. So I took a hot bath before getting ready for bed. I was sure I took the necklace off in the bathroom, Bess explained. I saw it in there last night but did not think anything of it at the time, George added. Could one of the maids have taken it? Asked Bess. Let's talk more about this in private. We don't need the staff to think that we are accusing that just yet, Nancy whispered as she led the others to her bedroom. Once there, George asked, "Should we call the police to investigate?" "I really don't think the police will be able to help us right now. Besides, if my hunch is correct, it might have not been a member of the staff," Nancy answered. "My letters were also stolen. That makes me wonder, why would the staff go through so much trouble to distract me? If a maid could have easily taken them while cleaning my room? It sounds like we need to continue to investigate and be on the lookout for anything strange," George suggested. "That is our best option at the moment," Nancy replied. George was gazing out the window when she said, "This must have once been a very beautiful place to live at one time. Based on the stories my mother used to tell me, it was lovely. The back garden had once been so large and full of plants that she used to pretend that it was a secret garden, like from the classic book," Nancy explained. "It sure is a shame that this place looks so run down now," Bess commented. "Why don't we help clean up the place a little?" George suggested. "To tell you the truth, I'm starting to feel stir-crazy in this house. And since your aunt can no longer afford a landscaper, this would a great way to thank her for the hostility," George added as she ruffled her short hair. "I like that. While we are out there, keep an eye out for anything out of the ordinary, no matter how small, girls. You never know what our next clue could be," Nancy said as she went over to her bedroom to change into some better-suited clothing. "That is a great idea. I'll go ask my aunt about it," Nancy said as she got up from sitting on the bed. Bess stood there tapping her foot while staring at her cousin. "Oh great, now I have to get all sweaty and ruin my nails. Oh, what fun this is gonna be." George smirked in response. Working hard and helping others is very rewarding in its own way. In response, Bess pouted as she began to looking for something more conformable to wear while working outside. After about 30 minutes, all three girls meet outside in the backyard. "So where do we start?" "The yard is such a huge mess," asked Bess. "First we need to get these limbs and twigs moved out of the way before we can do anything else," Nancy explained as she pulled her hair up into a ponytail. "Some look too heavy for us to move by ourselves. They will have to be cut up and moved by someone else later," George commented. "That is a point. For now, let's get started with the ones around the outside of the house." "I've already got permission by my aunt to burn the wood," said Nancy, as she showed the girls where to put the rubbish for a small controlled burn. "Good thing we got so much rain the other day. The ground is still moist and will make a controlled fire safer and easier to control. However, it wouldn't hurt to have the hosepipe handy just in case we need it," suggested George. The girls had really taken on a task much bigger than they had thought it was going to be. After about an hour of work, Bess had to stop and rest on an old iron bench. She drank some water while resting. Just then a gust of wind blew her hat right off her head and right into the flower beds that lined the house. "I'll get it, Bess," said Nancy, as she raced after it. Just as Nancy bent over to pick it up, she noticed some footprints in the moist soil. They were much bigger than Nancy's. "Must be a man," she thought. They led through the flower bed and up to a trellis covered in overgrown ivy and honeysuckle. "Girls, come over here quick. I think I found something," she yelled. "What is it, Nancy?" both girls asked after running over. "I think we just found how they've been sneaking in. See, these footprints lead right up to this trellis and it reaches up to that window up there," Nancy said. "What are you doing, George?" "You could hurt yourself," said Bess, as George started to climb the trellis. "Just testing this out. It can hold me but is not very sturdy." "Whoever climbed this could not have been too heavy," stressed George. "So, it was a slender man, then." "Good thinking, George. Look, girls, a cigar butt L is right under the window. This may be a clue." "But which room is that?" asked George. "I have a hunch. Bess, I need you to go up to my room and open the window." This might be the cause of the strange noises I heard while bathing before. Nancy added. If you say so, Nancy, replied Bess, as she went off towards the back door. Finally, the puzzle pieces are starting to fall into place. Nancy exclaimed, joyfully. Nancy, up here. Bess yelled from the window, as she waved wildly. Nancy's room was right next to the one the intruder had been using. This meant that the office window was being used as a doorway. Bess continued to wave at her friends as she leaned out of the window. Somehow, she lost her balance and tumbled out. God was with her though, and she managed to grab hold of the heavy long curtains. Nancy and George both looked up in terror. Bess was yelling wildly and kicking violently. Nancy was sure that the curtain rod would not last long. Chapter 12. Nancy and George felt very helpless when they looked up and saw their best friend, Bess Marvin, dangling from the open window 3 floors up. The young girl had lost her balance while waving and fell right out of the window, to only by the grace of God to grab hold of the edge of a long thick curtain. With no time at all to call for help, all the 2 girls could do was dart upstairs and try to pull her back in quickly. Every minute seemed like an eternity, as they raced through the large mansion. God let us get there in time, said Nancy, as they ran up the grand staircase. Someone help me. I can't hold on much longer. My grip is slipping. Bess yelled in sheer terror. She made the huge mistake of looking down, and suddenly, her head started to spin uncontrollably. Oh no! I'm going to die before I even got a chance to meet my soulmate and get married. Bess thought exclaimed. Minutes later, both girls reached the door to the bedroom only to see the curtain rod give under Bess's weight. Both dashed over to save their friend. George, the athletic track star, made it to the window first, just grabbing the end of the curtain before it could disappear. Unbelievably, the curtain ripped due to the strain upon it, sending Bess plummeting downward towards a premature death. No! George screamed, feeling hopeless. Time seemed to come to a standstill for Nancy, as she went towards the window. George sunk down to the floor and curled up into a ball. All they could hear was Bess screaming bloody murder as she fell. To their surprise, they heard a man grunt loudly, instead of the horrible sound of Bess hitting the ground. Nancy reached the window and stared down in shock at Bess. She had landed right on top of some strange man. Nancy teared up, feeling thankful to see Bess alive. Oh, thank God, said both girls. Girls, I'm a light. Well, the best a girl could be falling from such a height, but alive. Bess yelled as she tried to stand up on her own. When both girls were gazing down at their friend, the man got up to his feet and waved at them, before he helped Bess toward the door. Nancy recognized him at once. It was her boyfriend, Ned Nickerson. She had been dating this dreamboat for over a year and was sweet on him. Who wouldn't be with his tall height, cute dimples, dazzling blue eyes, and warm welcoming smile? Nancy was awestruck for a few moments before she managed to shake it off. Turning towards George, she said, "We better go check on Bess. She might be hurt worse than she is letting on." "Sure, whatever you say, Nancy," replied George, as she raised her eyebrows, teasing. The teen could tell that Nancy could barely hide a smile. Ned always made Nancy so giggly and giddy. She often wondered if she would one day find a guy that would have that effect on her. But on to the important task at hand, checking up on her cousin Bess. When they came down, they spotted that Bess was sitting in the middle of the couch beside Ned. She looked a little roughed up, but otherwise all right. All 3 girls gave each other a big hug. Ned quickly moved over to a chair to give Nancy room to sit down beside her friend. "How do you feel, Bess? That was a pretty bad fall you had." George asked worriedly. "Don't worry about me, girls. Ned caught me right before I hit the ground. I will most likely have some bumps and bruises, but nothing worse than that. Ned, you saved her. But wait, why are you here? Asked George as she turned towards him. Well, you see, I tried to call Nancy the other night, only to talk to her father instead. He told me of your trip, and since I am visiting one of my cousins in town for a few days, I decided to drop by and surprise my sweetheart, he answered while winking at Nancy. In response, Nancy moved over and sat on the arm of his chair to be closer and gave him a kiss on the forehead. Then she asked, so it was you I saw when we first dove through town. But how did you end up in the backyard? Was it all the screaming that led you there? Yeah, that is exactly what happened. I had just pulled up in my car and walked up to the front door, when I heard someone screaming like crazy. I ran around back to see what was wrong and got there just in time to see Bess falling. Luckily, I was close enough to dash over and catch her, but my legs give way from the strain and we both ended up on the ground anyway. Thank you, Ned, you are my hero. I hope catching me didn't hurt that bad. Bess added as she slightly pouted, feeling a little embarrassed about the fall. Nah, I've been hurt worse than that playing football before. No worries, Bess, he said with a slight chuckle, putting on a tough guy act. Suddenly an idea popped into Nancy's mind. With all the excitement, we forgot all about investigating what happened when Bess fell. We need to check the office right now, Nancy exclaimed as she headed upstairs, followed closely by the others. Chapter 13. Once they got upstairs, Nancy exclaimed, "Look here, there is garden soil on the floor in front of this window. This proves that someone has been climbing up from the garden at times. The window was also unlocked earlier," Bess added. "There is nowhere for anyone to hide in here. But you girls lock your rooms from now on. If your door does not have a lock, I know to make a makeshift barricade," Ned said considerably. "Looks like we left quite a mess of wood out there," Bess said almost absent-mindedly, as she glanced out the window. "Perhaps you just need to rest, Bess. We can finish up the work outside," George offered. Bess just nodded, yawned, and went off to her own room to lie down. Once they were back outside, Ned commented, "You girls must be pretty hard workers from all the wood you gathered. Doesn't look like there is much left that needs to be done. If you want, I can finish this work and you two can start on cutting back the dead greenery around the house. Whatever you think is best, Ned. My back is a little sore anyway from all this hard work." "So, a change of pace would be helpful," replied Nancy, as she glanced around the yard looking for the hedge clippers. "We only have about an hour before sunset. I think it would be fun to make a campfire out of this rubbish," Nancy said. The others agreed with nods before went back inside to ask the staff about supplies. About 30 minutes later, when Nancy was just finishing setting up the folding chairs, Ned asked, "Hey, guys, there is stuff inside the kitchen to make s'mores. Would you want some before dinner?" "Sounds really good, Ned. We should have the fire ready shortly," Nancy agreed before setting down to rest. "I'm going to wake Bess. She would be very angry at me if I let her miss out on this," Nancy said before going back inside. When reached the top of the stairs leading to Bess's room, something felt very off. She felt goosebumps forming on her arms and began to hear singing, but it sounded far away. "What in the world?" Nancy whispered as she walked closer to discover its origin. Once she reached the hallway, the lights flickered twice, then dimmed. Looking forward, she saw a young woman in a long white gown which looked very old-fashioned. She was standing in front of Nancy's room. She looked quite short, with very pale skin, and seemed to in some sort of trance. Nancy tried to walk closer, but the floorboard made a sound under her weight. In response, the young girl lifted her head to glare at Nancy. Before the strange figure began to run swiftly down the halls with Nancy following close behind. Nancy was amazed at how quickly the girl could run before they made a sharp turn. Nancy tried to give chase, however, she tripped on a long oriental rug and hit the floor. Scrambling to get back up on her feet, she continued the chase. Finally, the girl led her to a dead end before disappearing into thin air. How could she have just vanished? My gut tells me either she's a real ghost or there must be an entrance to a secret passageway. Just like before Nancy studied the thick paneled wall, she was looking for a hidden spring and the faint outline of the doorway. She even went so far as to try to pull the small table from the wall. To her surprise, Nancy found it bolted to the wall. This was just the clue Nancy was looking for. This meant that the wall behind the table must be the hidden door and the piece of furniture had been attached so that it would move along with the cleverly hiding it all the better. But where was the spring? It had to be hidden here somewhere unless it only opens from the inside. If it only could be opened from within, how the girl used it. Nancy pondered this, as she absent-mindedly grabbed hold of a wall sconce for support. Suddenly it moved slightly to the side. "What in the world?" asked Nancy, as she stumbled forward surprised at the sudden motion. Then she tried to turn it further. This triggered the wall to move slightly, letting Nancy push it open. Inside it looked very dark, obviously since this was hidden inside the walls of the home. A chill went down Nancy's spine as she peered inside. Chapter 14. Fighting the urge to run into the hidden passageway, Nancy turned back towards the guest rooms. Realizing getting caught and possibly kidnapped would not help this situation at all. Once she reached Bess and George's room, she quietly slipped inside. Bess was fast asleep, so Nancy had to gently shake her. The girl sat up and almost screamed when she saw Nancy's outline in the dark. Fear took over Bess as Nancy instantly reached, covering her friend's mouth. "Bess, it's me, Nancy. I need you to calm down. I've found a hidden passageway, but I need your help to investigate it safely," she said, feeling overwhelmed with excitement. "But why did you sneak in here and scare me half to death? There is no need for that." Bess fussed as she playfully hit Nancy with a pillow. Nancy wore a sly smile as she leaned forward. "The intruder seems to know this place very well. I figure that they have had to be here visited many times, or perhaps one of the hired help is involved. I think that we need to keep this information on the down low to not escalate the situation." "You do have a point. We need to think things through. Extra caution is advised in this situation," Bess added as she slipped back on her shoes before following Nancy to her room. They grabbed a flashlight and continued down the dark hallway to find out what awaited them. "One there," Nancy said, "I need you to wait right here. Just in case I'm no back in 30 minutes, I need you to call the others." She then showed Bess how to reopen the hidden door. Bess meekly peered inside before adding, "I do not like this, Nancy. Anything bad could happen to you in there." Nancy was untouched by her friend's words of caution. She took one long look inside the secret before announcing, "Adventure is out there." Once the girl was inside, the door quietly closed on its own behind her. As Nancy entered, she could smell motor oil. She guessed intruders had used it at some point in time to oil the hinges on the old door to keep from alerting anyone of their presence. Nancy looked around to find herself at the top of a long dark stairway. The only thing in sight was lots of old cobwebs that covered the ceiling. This place must have been long forgotten by the owners of the home. She went slowly down the stairs. Some of the steps felt as if they were about to give way under Nancy's weight. In response, she grabbed the handrail firmly and continued downward. Once at the bottom, Nancy found herself just outside a small door that left halfway open. After a quick glance inside, she could tell no one else was there. So, the teen stepped inside to get a better look. It was a very small room with a low ceiling that was just a few inches over Nancy's head. Maybe there is the truth in the theory that people are growing taller through the centuries. Nancy mused as she reached up to touch the ceiling. The room looked abandoned with just a rough wooden desk and matching chair inside. Above the desk was an old faded painting. On a hunch, Nancy checked behind it. There she found an old wall safe that was unlocked but was found to be empty. Glancing down at the desk, Nancy found a modern notebook and under it was the stolen love letters. She looked through the notebook. Inside appeared to be someone's notes about deciphering what was left of the letters and filling in the missing words in them. Looks like they have only gotten through half of the letters. Maybe we can set a trap to catch them once they back to continue their work, thought Nancy. She quickly tore out the pages from the notebook, then closed it. She put it back into its original spot. However, she took all the letters hoping no one would find out just yet. She did not feel it was worth losing the letter gained to us them as bait. It did not take long to finish going through the small desk. It was filled with plain writing paper and lots of trash from old food. After leaving the tiny room, Nancy noticed a lever on the opposite wall. After pulling it, the wall opened inwardly into the library. This door was hidden behind a built-in bookshelf. Let's see if I can find the way back in, said Nancy quietly as she began looking for the furniture. She began to pull on the books until she reached Journey to the Center of the Earth. This triggered the hidden spring and the passage opened once again. Bingo bongo, she said while smiling like a cat that just ate the canary. This time, as she backed upstairs to Bess through the passageway, this brave young girl timed herself. This time she used a pulley that hung from the ceiling to open the door. When she re-emerged, Nancy found that it had saved her 10 minutes coming up this way. I'm so glad to see that you are all right. I was just about to go and get the others, remarked Bess as she reached over to hug her best friend. There was no sign of the intruders. I am guessing they are long gone. This does prove, however, that they have another way of sneaking around, instead of just the office window that they were using before. This home has to have at least one other secret passage that can be used for entering the home. Nancy commented. What makes you say that? Asked Bess. Many of these old mansions originally had escape routes built into them, and I have a hunch this one does as well. Did you find anything useful while you were risking your life? Yes, the letters, Nancy said, as she pulled them from her pocket. I think we should go eat some s'mores before the others eat them all, Nancy suggested. Sounds really good to me. So, you got the fire going? Bess asked. Ned was just about to light the fire when I came inside, Nancy said, as they walked along outside. Once they had gotten outside, they found the other two already eating s'mores. Nancy sat in the chair to the right of Ned. He handed her a fully cooked s'more which she gladly ate. They were only out there about 30 minutes before they were called in for supper. Nancy's aunt gladly offered for Ned to join them. He, however, had to get back to his cousin's house before they started to worry about him. Just before leaving, he gave Nancy a peck on the cheek and promised to come back to visit the next day around noon. Nancy was sad to see her sweetie go, but was too tired to stay up much longer, anyways. Chapter 15. They had a quick dinner that night of fried chicken, greens, and potatoes. None of them brought up the subject of what they had found that day, concerned that it might frighten Nancy's elderly aunt. Thank you so much for working in my yard, it looks so much better. If only I was a little younger, then we could have worked on it all together, said Aunt Betty. We were happy to help you out. Call us any time you need us, replied Nancy with a wink. I know you girls will be leaving in just a few days, but I would like to invite you to stay a little longer. It's so nice to have company come visit me. This house hasn't been so lively since Roger left, stated Aunt Betty. Who is Roger? I've never heard of him before, replied Nancy. Roger was my son that died many years ago at 9 years old. There is a painting of him in the gallery along with the other family portraits, said the old woman while wiping her tearing eyes. After dinner, Nancy asked her aunt to put the letters in the safe before the three girls headed off to their bedrooms for the night. This time they made sure to lock both their doors and windows securely. Just as Nancy was about to begin to start studying the letters, she suddenly remembered the stained glass window from before. She got up from the bed, went into the bathroom and found the paper crumbled up in the dirty laundry. She studied the paper carefully and it read, "Our loves lies beneath the woodland chapel." Could this have anything to do with the chapel pictured in the window? The next day, Nancy found herself faced with a difficult decision of what to investigate next. After breakfast, she had a little talk with her aunt in the library. Nancy entered the room. She found the women seated in a leather club chair reading a novel. She approached and asked, "Aunt Betty, do you remember hearing anything about a woodland chapel anywhere around here before?" Aunt Betty looked from the book and took off her reading glasses. "Why yes, my dear, but I am very surprised that you asked about it. It burned down many years ago, around the time your mother died." Nancy sat down on a small love seat across from her aunt. Then leaned forward before asking, "Can you tell me anything about it?" "I can do better than that," she said, as she took a photo album off one of the many bookshelves that lined the walls. Turning the pages, sweet Aunt Betty said, "I was married there. It used to be a tradition within my late husband's family to be married there with a big party afterwards in this mansion. See, it is right here." The pictures were in black and white and were just a little faded with age. Oh my! Aunt Betty was stunning in her dress and her husband was a real looker, thought Nancy as she flipped through the album. "Wow, you sure did look lovely, Aunt Betty." "Oh, my thank you. It was the happiest day of my life. All my family had come that day, even from as far away as New York." "But wait, what's this right here?" questioned the young girl as she pointed to a strange shape into the photograph. "To be honest with you, Nancy, I don't really remember what that is." "I believe it looks like some sort of statue," replied her aunt as she stared intensely at the blurred image. Nancy gave the women a pout and asked, "Can you give me directions on how to get there? I take some pictures of this place and find out what that blur really is." Aunt Better thought for a moment before replying. "Sure, but I have no idea why you would want to go there. There is nothing much left there but a few charred walls and the nearby cemetery." In an effort to help her niece, Aunt Betty began to dig through a nearby end table searching for a pen and notepad to write the directions. Nancy leaned closer to give the women a kiss on the cheek before adding, "Thanks, Aunt Betty, you are a doll." Aunt Betty gave her a teasing look before adding, "Oh, do on, with her best. Ja Gabor impression." After going back to the bedroom, Nancy studied what she could of her own handwritten notes and the old letters. They were not perfect, with many missing paragraphs and words. All the letters were written by James, addressed to his love, Heather. He wrote of how much he missed her and would return soon with a surprise in hand. The second letter told how much he looked forward to their wedding and starting a family together. The third spoke of the last sea voyage he was to take before their wedding. Earlier Nancy had gotten it out of the safe to work on. It was very difficult to interpret. This letter was all about him warning her to hide her gift until he returned. He suspected one of her household staff to be in league with a terrible thief. If he would go through the trouble to write this and have her hide her gift, then it must have been of great value. Maybe gold or silver perhaps. Could have even been a land deed. "I need more to go on before we can figure this out," Nancy commented. Bess caught sight of Nancy, as she left her room. "Nancy, do you know the way to the gallery?" asked Bess. "I think so. I'm very surprised that you would even want to see it," Nancy replied as she turned to show the way. "Well, I was thinking out what your aunt had said last night about her son's portrait and thought it might be interesting to take a look at," George added. Chapter 16. "Here we are, girls," Nancy said as she pushed open the heavy door to the art gallery. "Wow, all the walls are filled with paintings. This must have been a very large family at one time." Bess commented as she studied the works of art. This must be the boy. It's the only painting of a child in here. George said calmly while pointing at a large painting of a child climbing a tree. He looked were lively and carefree. And look, he had your aunt eyes and smile. The red hair was from his father's side of the family. Nancy quickly added in. Might as well take a look at the paintings while we're here, said George, in a nonchalant tone. A few minutes had passed, when Bess became bored and decided to rest on a small velvet chair in the corner of the room. She just sat there for a while lost in thought, as she played with her hair. As she sat there, her eyes came to rest on an ornately carved picture frame painted gold in fine detail carved into the wood. The teen stood up and walked closer to get a better look at the work, before commenting, "Wow, what a lovely dress, and check out that necklace." She was just simply stunning, no doubt about that. This girl must have been a heartbreaker in her time. Bess said. Really, which one? Nancy asked out of curiosity, as she walked over. This one right here in front of me. From the style of her dress, I'm guessing it must be pretty old. Bess was right, the girl was quite stunning. That necklace she wore looked like it was very expensive. Nancy felt like she had seen this girl somewhere else before. Perhaps in another painting somewhere else in the mansion. Just then she noticed that there was a name carved into the wood just below the painting. It read Heather Davenport. This had to be the same Heather from the old tale and letters. She took a closer look at the necklace she wore. It looked like it was made with pigeon blood rubies, and very rare gemstone can only be found in the antique form, due to the fact that it can no longer be safely mined. Nancy wondered, could this be the treasure she had hidden away so many years ago? If this was true, was it ever recovered? Her fiancé had died at sea and Heather of the fever not long after. So there was a pretty good chance that the treasure was still hidden somewhere nearby. It was as if it was just waiting all this time for Nancy come along and find it. Nancy studied the painting once more for clues. She resorted to even talking it off the wall and checking on the back, but found nothing of interest. The girls knew it wouldn't be long before Ned arrived, so they went downstairs to have a quick lunch. They ate some small cucumber sandwiches, apple tarts, and milk to wash it down. Not long after, there was a knock at the door. Nancy rushed over, checked her hair and makeup in a small compact before pulling the door open. "Ned, I'm so glad to see," she said as her expression changed to a look of surprise. There stood before them the banker from before. He noticed that Nancy was confused and tried to push his way in. "Oh no. You don't. You are not welcome here," said George once the man was inside. "Move it, brat. I have business to attend to," he said while trying to go around them. "What do you mean? You've been told not to come back here," Nancy requited, as she snapped from the spell of confusion. "You better not be giving my girl any trouble if you get my drift," said a loud male voice from outside the door. The man turned angrily and saw Ned slip in the door right behind him. "Now I don't want any trouble," said the banker in a slightly nervous tone of voice. Nancy noticed that his hands had begun to tremble slightly. "You better leave before my buddies show up or you will be in big trouble," Ned threatened, as he stepped in front of Nancy and puffed up his chest to look tougher and more intimidating. The man reluctantly turned around to leave with a furious look on his face. After they watched him leave, Ned told the girls that he doubted that was the last that they would see of the banker. "I have met plenty of people with his same kind of attitude in the past. Unfortunately, they are extremely hard-headed and refuse to let things go," he said while shaking his head in frustration. Chapter 17. What is this I hear about us some dates showing up later? Bess asked, as she carefully touched up her pale pink lipstick. In response, Ned flashed an awkward smile. "I need some time alone with Nancy." Not wanting to ditch anyone, I arranged to have my 19-year-old cousin and his best friend to spend some time with you girls. I do not really care what you do, but keep an eye Nancy for us. You know how she so often finds ways of getting into trouble, remarked George. I will be glad to, he replied while smiling sweetly over towards Nancy. Oh look, here comes the guys now, Ned said as he pointed to a cute white Volkswagen that was coming their way. As it came closer, they could see a shaggy-haired blonde and a black-haired man riding in the car. Dibs on the blonde, said Bess as the boys pulled up. This wasn't supposed to be a date, Bess. Hey, no fair, George said while following his cousin down the long driveway. One of the guys whistled at the girls. They made it just as the young men were getting out of the vehicle. Girls, let me introduce you to my cousin, Carter Nickerson. He's a mechanics major at the River Heights University. In fact, he even fixed up this car, Ned said as he gestured for Carter to come stand next to him. Carter was about 5'9", had sandy dark blonde hair, green eyes, a normal build, but looked just like Ned in the face. So nice to meet all of you. I apologize in advance for my friend, Jace. He can be crude at times. You would never guess he's a med major from his manners. And this is Jace. He's a total goof most of the time, said Ned, as he shook the boy's shoulder. Jace was shorter and stood at 5'6", had a common hairstyle, had piercing blue eyes, had a slight build, and a goofy smirk he wore quite often. Knock it off. You both are just trying to make me look like a total idiot in front of the girls, he complained, as he shook Ned off. Then he winked and grinned at Bess. She just rolled her eyes back at him. Ignore him, he'll calm down soon enough, said Carter, as he opened the front passenger side door for Bess. Guess it's my turn now, said Jace, as he went over to open the other door for George. She made the, I'm watching you, gesture, as she got inside. In response, he just gulped hard. Before they could drive off, Ned and Nancy walked over. Made sure you both behave yourselves. Jace, you better calm down, they won't like your sense of humor, Ned said as he leaned on the rolled-down window frame. Got ya, boss, they will have a great time, added Carter just before driving off. Nancy waved to her friends as they disappeared down the road. Do you have any idea what movie was going to see tonight? Asked Nancy, as they both got into Ned's car. I thought you might like to see the new Herbie movie. Great idea, sounds really fun, but how about some sightseeing? I happen to have the perfect place in mind. Your wish is my command, my lady. Chapter 18. Nancy loved traveling with Ned, the trips were always fun. Out of the corner of her eye, Nancy could see Ned stealing glimpses as they drove along. What is it? She asked, grinning like a fox. Oh, nothing, Nancy. Let's turn on the radio for a while, the boy said, as he tried to hide the blush that was creeping up his handsome face. Ned knew he was lucky to have a girl like Nancy. She was very intelligent, lovely, kind-hearted, and loved adventure. She was his ideal dream girl and he hoped to always be with her. There is this new station, called 101 Crush, can you find it? He asked. Sure, that does not sound too hard, the girl said, as she started playing with the device. Ned struggled to keep his eyes on the road with Nancy in the car. With an angelic face, sparkling blue eyes, and an adorable smile, what guy in his right mind could keep his eyes off of her? Once they found the correct station, Rocking Robin, by the Jackson 5 started to play. They started to sing along with the tune. Looking over at her, Ned could barely contain a laugh. She looked so silly the way she was dancing by waving her arms around. So, Nance, we're almost to the old bridge, which way should we turn from there? He said before turning down the music. Let's see here, she said while carefully studying the crumbed up slip of paper. Looks like we take a left after the bridge and then a right when you get to the fork in the road. That sound about right, thanks, babe. Ned said as he flashed Nancy a smile. In response, she smiled back at him before turning to watch the scenery out of the window. The trees were so lovely this time of year with all their daring shades of amber, reds, and oranges. Those leaves would make a wonderful backdrop for photography, she commented. As they continued on, Nancy spotted something shiny through the foliage. After getting closer, she realized that it was the sunlight reflecting off the steam which ran under the wooden bridge they were about to drive over. This must be the bridge that is called the Lover's Gateway, she whispered, absent-mindedly. It had earned the name by being such a popular spot for couples to take the engagement photos. Countless others had even been married in this area because of the beautiful scenery. Checking the map once more, she added, it should be about a 10-minute drive after the next right turn. Look for a dirt road. All right, I can see the turn up ahead, he said as they slowed down to make the turn. Not long after, the both was very surprised to pull up in front of the ruins of an old stone church. From the road, they could see that great arches where stained glass windows once were. The old place had become overgrown with lots of ivy and wild morning glory. Come on, I want to get a closer look, she said with her camera in hand. Ruins like these always make for the very interesting shots. As she got out of the car, the girl noticed a calming floral scent. Walking around the base of the large structure, they could see the remains of a crumbling rock wall and arch. Hey Ned, will you stand right in front of this arch and pose for a picture? Sure, anything for you, he said while walking over. Convinced that a relaxed pose was the best idea, he just relaxed and leaned against the stone wall. This should turn out looking great. Let's take a few more over beside all the ivy that is growing on the opposite wall. I feel the greenery will add more visual interest to the images. After taking a few more shots, she moved over to get a better angle but was blinded by bright light. What in the world is that? She remarked. Looks like something is reflecting intense sunlight from behind the mass of ivy, remarked Ned as he walked closer. Bending down to examine it, he could feel a large shape behind the greenery. Taking out his pocket knife, the boy started to hack the ivy away. Slowly a statue began to emerge. Nancy was almost jumping with glee as Ned finished uncovering the statue. It was a large female angel made of either stone or concrete. She was crying and holding a large crystal in her hand. The crystal is what is reflecting the bring light. Can you remove it, Ned? Nancy asked as she closely inspected their discovery. Ned struggled to remove the crystal before admitting, no, it seems to be firmly attached. He ran his fingers through his hair out of frustration. Do you suppose the crystal was placed there as a decoration or to suit a purpose? Could be for either. I see no indication of it having a secret meaning as of yet. We still need to look around more and explore. I feel like there has to be more clues around here somewhere, the girl replied as she studied the walls once more. I want to give this place a good look over, but I need you to check all the large of ivy. Nancy added. All right, but watch your step. This place is pretty overgrown and could be hard to navigate, he replied before they split up to explore the area. Chapter 19. Nancy walked around and finally found the spot pictured in her aunt's wedding photo. In this area, she found a small dog statue in what used to have been a flower bed. After getting a better look at the object, she commented, must have just been added for decoration. Just then she heard a branch snap nearby. Ned, is that you, sweetie? She asked nervously, realizing that was a bad place to be alone. If she screamed, would Ned be close enough to hear? She stood completely still and listened closely. It sounded like someone was close and somewhere to the right of her. To not alarm whatever that was, Nancy acted calm and walked behind a wall to give her some cover. Going around to the other end of the wall, she pretended to still be taking pictures. It's just a forest animal. Calm down, girl, she thought to herself. There began to be a low rusting sound from the other side of the barrier. Nancy made a daring move by peeking at the creature. She was shocked to get a glimpse of a man hiding in the foliage. This was her chance get away, she just had to be brave. Taking a deep breath and holding her camera firmly in her hand, Nancy turned on the bright camera flash. Stepping out from behind the wall, she yelled, "Hey you," at the stalker, at the same time hitting the flash button repeatedly. This blinded the man momentarily, causing him to shield his eyes. Nancy made sure to get a good look at him before taking off. She was running in the direction she had last seen Ned in hopes of getting to safety. The man started to give chase but was slowed by a slight limp. Hearing the man coming after her, Nancy yelled for her boyfriend. After running through the forest for a while, she caught sight of Ned up ahead and yelled once more. The young man met up with Nancy and cupped the girl's frightened face in his steady hands. "What happened?" he asked, feeling very concerned. "Ned, I'm being chased by a strange man," she replied in tears before looking backward. Thankfully there was no one else in sight for the moment. "It's going to be all right, Nancy. I have got you," he said soothingly while holding her tight in a tender embrace. Just then they heard a great racket coming from nearby. They caught sight of the man just before he darted behind a large thicket. "That is him," she yelled out in fear. Ned paused only to hand her a set of keys from his pocket. "Nancy, take my keys and hide in the car," he dared to demand before dashing off after the man. "No, I want to help," Nancy said, trying to argue as she followed after her boyfriend. "Heck no. Get to safety, I'll be all right," Ned shouted over his shoulder, just before disappearing from sight. It took a moment for Nancy's senses to come back to her. Once they did, she dashed back to the road. Nancy was so upset that she dropped the keys while trying to unlock the car door. However, the second try was a success. After getting inside and locking the door, she was at a loss of what to do. She knew the man had to be in his 40s and had a small-looking frame. According to logic, Ned should be able to overtake him without too much trouble. What if there were others hiding somewhere in the woods? They could possibly kill Ned. "No, don't think that way," she said while shaking her head from side to side in an attempt to clear her thoughts. "This is taking forever. Maybe some music will help distract me," she said while switching on the radio. "Help" by the Beatles was playing on the radio, and it did at least seem to lessen her anxiety. As sat there in the automobile, a rustling came from behind the car. Slowly Nancy turned her head only to have her eyes grow huge from fright. Two huge black wolves were circling the vehicle, acting as if she was prey. Chapter 20. Nancy felt afraid when the menacing wolves started to howl menacing. However, she just could not shake the feeling that something was off about this situation. In response, the teens slid to the floorboard, as the animals scratched at the car, trying their best to get in. Nancy wondered if these wolves were really wild or just trained to cause a diversion or just frighten people out of this area. But why would anyone go to such trouble? Just then, she thought of Ned. He had been gone for almost an hour. Nancy prayed for his safety before daring to peek out the window. As Nancy looked out, she saw more wolves approaching. Knowing that they needed help, Nancy sat up and cracked up the car, hoping to escape the wild beasts. As the car started, the engine noise caused the animal to back a few feet that were just enough for Nancy to speed up the dirt road. At the very last minute, one of the dogs jumped right in front of the car. Nancy took a sharp turn and just missed hitting it by mere inches. The dogs chased her for 10 minutes before they finally gave up. "Now what am I going to do? How in the world can I help now?" she questioned. She decided to drive back into town to get help. On the way there, a person came into view walking towards her on the side of the road. Slowing to get a better look, Nancy could not believe her eyes. It was Ned. "Ned, where were you?" "I was worried sick," she exclaimed, visibly upset. "I will explain, just let me catch my breath first," said the young man as he got in the car and sunk into the seat. He was clearly exhausted. "I am just so happy you are all right," Nancy exclaimed. "Glad to hear you care about me so much, sweetie," he said, grinning cutely. I chased the man for about a mile through the heart of the woods. He was slow but had a sizable head start. He seems to know the area really well. He has to be a local to know it so well, she said thoughtfully. After trailing the man for a while, he started down a path that led out of the woods. There was a car waiting for him, with a red-haired woman inside. Before I could get close enough to grab him, he jumped inside and they took off towards town. "Did you get a good look at the woman?" "Not really, it happened so fast. I did notice that she looked young, but that is all I can remember. But I did find this red fake fingernail on the ground near where the car was parked," Ned said while digging through his pocket to pull out the clue. "Ned, this looks just like the one I found in my room the night the letters were stolen. This proves that this is all connected," the girl said excitedly, as she hugged her sweet boyfriend. "But why did I find you walking along the side of the road?" asked Nancy. "I'm not from the area and have no idea how to navigate these woods alone. So, I just ended up following the road to find you," Ned said while seat belting himself. "Now why don't we go get some soft serve ice cream really quick and then head over to the police headquarters to report this?" Ned asked, just before his tummy rumbled loudly. "But Ned, I can handle this without the police getting involved. The dogs were not very hard to deal with," Nancy said as they began to drive down the road again. "Not this time, Nancy." "Wait, what dogs?" Ned wondered. "Well, you see." "Come on, Nancy, spill it," he said, looking very determined. Chapter 21. After telling Ned all that had happened to her in the woods, they drove back into town before ending you at the drive-in. A young girl came up to them on roller skates and asked for their order. "I want a small chocolate-dipped soft serve, please," said Nancy. "Make mine a sundae with caramel sauce, nuts, and a cherry on top," Ned added. "Sure, whatever you want, Dreamboat," said the waitress with a wink directed at Ned. "What a jerk. Can't she see we're a couple?" Nancy mumbled under her breath. In response, Ned grinned wickedly. "I would have never pinned you as the jealous type," he said, raising an eyebrow, mockingly. Nancy gave him a strange look before adding, "I have no idea what you are talking about." Ned reached over to hold her hand just as a different server brought out their sweets on a large metal tray. "Must have been a shift change. That waitress must have left just now," Ned replied. Nancy gave him a quick death glare from across the car. Ned smiled nervously, making a mental note to never cross this woman. Neither of the two said anything as they sat there and ate. Next, they drove to the police station to file a report on what had happened out in the wood earlier. "May we speak to an officer? We need to have a word with someone," Ned asked. "Hold on, I'll check," said the middle-aged office worker that had met them at the door upon arrival. After a few minutes, the women returned from the back of the office and said, "Officer Jones will see you now." Walking into the office, they spotted Officer Jones behind a large oak desk. She was a tall African-American woman who appeared to be in her 30s and was quite friendly. The two teens filled her in on what had happened in the woods but were careful to leave anything about the happenings back at Aunt Betty's home. Nancy had learned before not to share extra information with the police, especially when it came to clue connected to a haunted house. Mostly, because they normally did not believe her. Miss Jones cleared her throat before adding, "I will have an officer go check to go out that area and tell you what we find, however, suspect it might have been a homeless man. They quite often camp out in the woods or even live in old junk cars. If that is the truth, how would you explain the wolves that attacked us?" Ned asked as he fidgeted, feeling anxious. The officer was thoughtful for a moment before leaning back in her cushioned desk chair and adding, could be a number of reasons really. For instance, a few rabid animals have been seen in this area quite recently. Or it could simply be a pack of real wolves that ventured too close to camping sites and learned to come to rely on humans for food. It really is impossible to tell at this point what the true cause is. But what about Nancy's? Ned started to say before Nancy grabbed his arm and gave him a look as if to say not to continue any further. The officer stood up from her seat to escort the teens out of the office. I will get back in touch if we find anything. Ned felt very annoyed and frustrated with the entire situation. I don't care what she thinks, Nancy. We know what really happened out there in the wilds and I feel that you might need a guard after all that has happened. I know how you feel, Ned. The police rarely take us, teenagers, seriously anymore, she answered while getting back inside the car and seat-belting herself in. Do you think it might be alright with your aunt if I stay overnight for a while? I just don't think it is safe for you to be out investigating this case without some muscle to back you up. Ned asked with deep concern showing in his expressive eyes. My aunt is very old-fashioned, so I am not quite sure if she will approve. But perhaps you can stay on another floor and in another wing of the house, she suggested. All right, we can ask when I take you home tonight, the young man said as he appeared to relax a bit. Now how about the rest of our date, he said with a cheeky smile on his face. That is an interesting question, Nancy said as she moved over, closer to her boyfriend. They kissed softly for a moment, with Ned breaking away first. As he started the car, Nancy gave him a tender kiss on the cheek, causing him to blush. Let's just drop off this film and then we can go sightseeing. We still have 3 hours before it gets dark around here anyway. Nancy commented as she checked her makeup in a small compact mirror. As you wish, my love, was his reply as they drove away. Chapter 22. This is so much fun. Nancy exclaimed while riding a beach cruiser bike around Stephen Park. Along beside Nancy, rode her cute college boyfriend, Ned Nickerson. Yeah, this idea was a stroke of pure genius. I get to spend time with my favorite girl and get some much-needed exercise as well. Ned announced as he raced along. All the studying for my exams over the last few weeks have not left me with much time to get outside and enjoy myself, Ned said as he wore a charming grin. How did you do on the exams anyway? Asked Nancy as she pulled off the gravel pathway, to rest for a moment. I passed with an A-. I am so glad to only have 2 more years of college left. Then my real life can start. I can believe that, replied Nancy as took a sip of water, before offering Ned the bottle. Ned greedily gulped down half the bottle before pouring the rest of the cool water over his head. Nancy, I challenge you in a race from right here by the entrance to the statue on the other end of the park. You are on, pretty boy. I will not go easy on you this time. Nancy boasted while smiling smugly. Let us just make sure we do not get too caught up in this. Remember that the movie starts in just over an hour and we don't want to be late. Nancy reminded him with a wink. Ned rolled his eyes at his ginger babe. All right, I'll take you out to eat before the movie, but whoever loses has to buy the cherry sodas, he added, just before prepping to take off. No, whoever loses has to buy the sodas and the dessert, laughed Nancy. After all that ice cream we had earlier? Ned asked as he gave her a questioning look. The boy shrugged his shoulders before adding, all right then, I hope you brought your wallet. On your mark, get set. Go. They both took off at high speed with Ned ahead with a narrow lead. Nancy wished that she had spent more time working out because she was really feeling the burn in her calf muscles. Then a bright light caught her eye from the right. It was the sun reflecting off the placid blue lake and it looked very stunning. For a moment she was lost in thought, allowing Ned to get even further ahead. As she snapped back to reality she fussed, "UGGH. How can he be this far ahead already? Yikes! Nancy took a sharp turn on the biking trail too quickly and failed to see a little girl riding along with her father. There was no enough room for her to stop with the brakes. Panicking, she took a sharp turn the right which sent her into the cold lake. Thankfully the water was shallow and only up to her knees. "Oh man, I got myself wet," she mumbled while walking the bike back onto the trail. "I guess this is what I get for being so competitive. My only chance to win is to really kick it into high gear," the teen said as she pushed herself hard to catch back up with Ned. 10 minutes later Nancy crossed the halfway mark which was the top a large hill. From up here the young girl had a better view of the area and noticed how far behind she had fallen behind Ned. The only way she could win was by using shortcuts. "Maybe if I cut through that clearing over there by the flower beds and make a sharp right before the fountain I can make it," Nancy thought. The trail she was on took a safer route down the large hill, but if she veered off of it and went straight that should give her a quick boost. So Nancy maneuvered the bike under the rope fence and then went right over to the edge of the hillside. Looking down it seemed sort of scary, but Nancy knew she could handle it. She took one deep breath in and tried to move, but fear held her still. "Come on, I have faced far more dangerous situations than this many times before. I can do this." Taking one more deep breath she closed her eyes and pushed off. Seconds later she opened them. Nancy had to be going close to 30 miles an hour and it was really exciting. "Oh no, there is a slight jump at the bottom. Gonna have to slow down just a little. I have less control when moving this fast." She squeezed down slightly on the hand brakes and made the jump. Standing up on the bike and holding tight to the handlebars she made the landing. With the momentum still in her favor, Nancy hardly had to pedal along and quickly reached the clearing. Taking the short cut through some empty flowered beds slowed her down. Now going at around 18 miles an hour, she made a dash towards the fountain and made the turn. Cutting back onto the bike path she was now almost neck to neck with Ned. He wore an expression as if he was saying, "Wow. Where did you come from?" Both of them were very tired and worn out, as they reached the stature. With one last surge of energy from Nancy, it ended a close tie. "Wow. You sure did give a run for my money." "Nancy, you are amazing," the young man exclaimed while panting for air. "You are quite the athlete yourself, Mr. Captain of the football team," Nancy replied, elbowing him in the side. "Are you still up for dinner and the movie after all this?" Ned asked. "Yeah, but let us rest here just a little while longer. I don't mind missing the opening credits." "Sure, anything for you. We wasted around 30 minutes so we have about 40 to get to the show," Ned said while he wound his wristwatch. "We better get going then. Or we will have to make new plans," the young girl said while standing up. "Even if we did miss the show it would be that bad. Any time spent with you is special and something to treasure," he said while looking into her eyes. "That is a pretty good line, Ned," Nancy replied. "I bet you say that to all the girls." "I really mean it, Nancy," he exclaimed with a hurt look. Chapter 23. "Thank you for buying the food, but I really do not mind splitting the bill," Nancy said, in between bites of her double cheeseburger. The juices could be seen trickling from her mouth both every oversized bite. Ned smirked as he reached over with a napkin to lightly dab the juice from the girl's chin. "We have to hurry if we want to make it in time for the movie." Nancy took a long sip from her cherry Coke before adding, "Chill, we got this." After the couple finished eating they paid the bill and piled back into Ned's small car. Ned pulled back onto the main road which was never busy. Nancy enjoyed the ride and just tapped her fingers to the rhythm of the music as the car's radio played. As they drove along something caught Nancy's attention. "Look over at the on the right. It's the George at Tom's home-style barbecue stand," Nancy exclaimed as she pointed out the window. Want to go over and say hello really quick? It should only take a minute, the young man suggested to his girlfriend. Sounds like a great idea. Nancy replied as they slowly pulled over. Bess had just turned around and spotted them right away and ran over quickly. Nancy, I am so surprised to run into you here. Bess exclaimed before calling George over. Yeah, we just spotted you from the road. So have you been having any fun? Yeah, but more so after George put Jace in his place. I will tell you more about it later, it is really funny. Nancy, there you are, George added as she walked up while sipping on a large sweet tea. Would you be interested in going to the movies with us? Nancy asked her friends. There really is not much else to do around here after dark in the dinky town. Ned murmured under his breath. Then he leaned against the hood of the car to rest while waiting. Sure, sounds fun, just let me talk the boys into it. It will be no problem at all. Bess replied with a wink and a touch of excitement in her voice. Bess did not waste any time before running over to Carter. She played with her hair shyly while questioning the young man. Carter seemed very jittery and clumsy around her young friend. He must have quite the crush on her. Nancy mused. George leaned in closer to Nancy and whispered, Bess pretty much has Carter wrapped around her little finger. So it seems. The movie does start in just 15 minutes. You will need to hurry. You go ahead, it will not take long for us to finish up here. George urged. All right, see you guys in a few, Nancy said before getting back into the car and driving off to the theater. Once they drove up, Ned exclaimed, wow, this place sure is packed tonight. I did not know there were even this many people in the whole darn town. Well, it is a new movie and you said it yourself, that there is not much else to do in this town. Let's try to get a spot in the middle, that way we will have a better view and avoid having to hear the couple's sweet talking in the back, Nancy suggested. Sure, Nancy, there's a spot right there, the young man replied while parking. Then he adjusted the radio to the right station to hear the movie. It's so nice to have some time with you, Ned, Nancy said while getting comfortable in the seat. Yeah, it is. Hey, look, there are Bess and George parked way up there in the front. Ned remarked as the girls started to wave at them. The two enjoyed the movie and thought it was really funny and silly. Nancy's favorite part was when Herbie raced on the side of a building and almost chased the foolish villain off. Once the movie had played halfway through, there was a quick break for people to use the restroom and buy snacks. Ned, I'm going to go grab some popcorn. Do you want anything? Nancy asked. Just get a large popcorn tub and we will share it, Ned said with a charming smile. All right, I will be right back, love, Nancy said before getting out and stretching her legs a bit. Getting to the snack stand proved to be an ordeal all on its own. With the place too crowded, there were lots of people standing around their cars chatting and goofing around to pass the time until the movie continued playing. But after having to dodge lots of people and slipping through a tight opening, she finally made it. Only to find a really long line waiting for her at the sack stand. With no other choice but to wait in line, she quickly got bored. Nancy's attention shifted to a man who had pushed his way through the packed line. Once he reached the top, the man demanded to speak with the owner. Nancy, curious as to what was really going on here, moved closer. She was shocked to see the man who had followed her out near the church. Nancy hid behind the mass of customers to see if she could pick up some new clues.
Chapter 24. The owner of the drive-in walked up to see what was lying on. He was tall, in his mid-40s, and had a short black beard. What is it this time, Stan? The man asked. You dirty snake. You still owe me $40 from our last poker game, the stalker yelled. I don't owe you anything. That was a fair game, exclaimed the owner as he stepped closer. No, it was not. You cheated me somehow. Stan yelled as he began to become irate. It is time for you to leave. Stan, you are bothering my customers, insisted the owner. I do not give a damn about any of your customers. I am not leaving until you give me back the money. That is it. I have had enough of this. I am calling the law right now, fumed the owner before he picked up the phone. You will have to kill me before I will leave this place without the money, yelled Stan as he began to throw bags of popcorn on the ground. Just then Nancy's view was cut off, but once the police sirens could be heard, Stan became upset and ran off to a small gray car parked at the road. As the car pulled away, she was able to write down the license plate number with a pen and a small notebook she pulled out from her purse. Ned, he is here. Nancy exclaimed to Ned when she made it back to his car. Who is here, Nancy? Is it your father? The young man asked as he looked around, seemingly very confused. After quickly jumping back into the car, the young girl replied, No, it's the man you chased through the woods. If we hurry, there is still a chance to catch him. Nancy, he is dangerous. We should just leave this to the police. I do not want you to get hurt. Ned replied with a stern look in his eyes. By the time the police arrive, he will be long gone. Ned, please help me, the young girl begged. As if agreeing silently, the car roared to life and they drove to the entrance. Now which way? He asked. He made a right turn out of here, but the vehicle he was in was moving pretty slow. Most likely needs repairs done to the engine. In response, Ned drove faster, but the car was still not in sight. So the teens drove around the area, hoping to run into the stalker by chance. Well, Nancy, looks like we lost him, Ned said while running his fingers through his thick brown hair. Any ideas? Babe? At least we still have the license plate number, however, I would have really liked to be able to tail him. I need more clues to figure out what is really going on behind the scenes. Nancy said. Just then they jumped up when a nearby car backfired. Hey, that looks like the car I saw take off with the stalker in it earlier. Nancy exclaimed. That is him. Make sure you don't lose him this time. He must have pulled into the gas station to fuel up. We are so lucky to be right here at this moment, the young girl said excitedly as she pointed towards the old junk heap of a car. It was an old rust bucket, barely recognizable as a Ford Vedette. The bumper was missing and the body of the car was dented in a few places. The teenagers managed to follow him for about 10 miles before the stranger made a sharp right turn. Ned missed the turn and had to do a U-turn to double back. This lost them time while the criminal managed to slip away. Oh man, we are never going to catch him now, the young man exclaimed when they met a red light at the intersection. All the two could do watch as the old car made one last turn before it disappeared into the traffic. Both of them drove around until 9:30 that night but didn't see hide or hair of the man. The stranger had seemed to be heading out towards the lake with the last turn he took, but it was not enough to investigate.
Chapter 25. The young couple arrived back at the mansion at 10 o'clock. Once they entered the building, they found a light left on in the sitting room. Hello. I'm back from my date. Nancy called as they ventured deeper into the home. Immediately, her great-aunt appeared at the door with her knitting still at hand. The woman must have stayed up late waiting for them to return. Oh, Nancy. I'm so glad that you are all right. Your friends came home hours ago. Bess said you had taken off in the middle of the movie without them and I was so worried, the aunt said softly. We were all right. Unfortunately, we did run into some trouble while sightseeing. Nancy told her aunt vaguely what had happened in the woods and why they had taken off from the drive-in. Nancy had decided early on not to say anything else that had happened in her aunt's mansion because it might alarm her greatly. Nancy asked Ned to go wait out in the hall before continuing on with the conversation. In light of what happened yesterday, Ned might be allowed to stay here for a few days to watch out for us. That is if he is allowed. Ned concerned for our safety and is never any trouble. So, can he stay here? the young girl asked while studying her aunt's reaction. In response, Aunt Betty looked Nancy over, as if she was in deep thought for a moment, then sighed deeply. "I'm not quite sure what your father will think of this, Nancy," the woman said while getting up from the high-backed chair. "I do think that you would benefit from having a male companion around to keep you safe, however, it would not be proper to have him sleeping so close by you young girls." The old woman sat down next to Nancy and looked deeply into her eyes. "He can stay in the other wing near my own room." Suddenly she took Nancy's hand before adding, "You are fine girls and I am proud of you all. I highly doubt anything scary will happen, but you all lock your rooms at night. I will have no boys in your bedrooms. I do not want any angry parents giving me trouble later." Both of them made their way back up towards the front door, where Ned sat waiting. Nancy went over and told him the details and where he would be sleeping. "Come now you two, it is late and we all need our rest," Aunt Betty said as she motioned towards the staircase. "I will show Ned to his room. However, I'm afraid he will have to sleep in what he is wearing for tonight. Because I donated all of my late husband's clothing to the Salvation Army shortly after his death," she explained as the group ascended the stairs. Once they reached the top stairs, they split up and Nancy headed toward her own room. As she passed her friend's door, Nancy could see the light was off. "They must be asleep already. I will just have to wait till tomorrow to fill them in on all that has happened," Nancy thought to herself. Nancy was very worn out from all that had happened that day. So, she quickly changed into some pajamas, brushed her teeth, and climbed onto the bed. There she felt as if she was floating on a soft cloud. She laid there for quite a while but couldn't sleep. Thoughts of the case kept popping up and would not cease. It seemed as if her mind was racing but her body was exhausted. It felt like hours later when she finally started to drift off to sleep. Just then she heard what sounded like footsteps coming from outside her room. Nancy slowly got up and tiptoed up to her bedroom door. Despite putting her ear to the door, she could not hear anything at all. So, the young girl unlocked the door and cracked it just in time to see a person turn down the hall. Who could that be at this time of night? Nancy questioned when she began to follow the strange form. Chapter 26. The strange women Nancy was following moved swiftly through the dimly lighted halls. Unfortunately, it was very difficult for Nancy to keep up this quick pace in the dark, a few times resulting in the teen running into furniture she was unable to see in the dark. As she trailed behind, all Nancy kept seeing was glances of the stranger, as they wandered down the halls. As she walked down the hall leading up towards the third-floor stairs, the lights flickered on and shone dimly, which caused eerie shadows to cast upon the walls. As if it wasn't creepy enough. These darn shadows appear to be escaping from another realm only to invade this plane of reality, Nancy mumbled as she passed by. Suddenly, Nancy spun around to look behind herself, when she heard a door close somewhere in that direction. She wondered if someone was hiding in the shadows just waiting for their chance to do something vile. With Nancy's long history of crime solving, she had experienced more than her fair share of ill will from all kinds of people. With her nerves already on edge, Nancy nearly took off down the hall from fright when she heard the creak of floorboards, seemingly from somewhere nearby. The teen wondered where the noise was coming from. Was no one anywhere in sight. The sounds became louder as Nancy continued to creep down the long hall. It now seemed to be coming from right beside her. "What is going on here?" she questioned. To Nancy's surprise, a raven just outside the large window suddenly took to the sky, crying out loudly into the dark of night. Nancy jumped slightly at the noise before stepping forward to get a better view of the outside. The large red-eyed bird sat on a tree branch just a few yards away, staring menacingly back at her. "That is strange," Nancy commented just before the large bird took off from the tree and headed straight for her. "Oh no! It is going to break the glass," Nancy exclaimed as she drove to the floor. Moments later, when nothing happened, she glanced outside once again to find no bird in sight. The girl felt so relieved, she let out a sigh. What a demonic creature! A voice said from behind her. Nancy turned to see who it was, only to discover Ned. "Nancy, are you all right?" he asked, looking half asleep, standing there in his sweatpants and a plain white tee. After doing a double take, Nancy responded by saying, "I guess so, Ned." "But why are you here?" "I got lost on my way back from the restroom. Then I ended up just wandering around trying to find my way back to my room," Ned said as he tried to fight off a powerful yawn. "Oh, then why?" she tried to say, but was interrupted by someone giggling. The couple turned their head to see the young women Nancy had been trailing, standing only a few feet from them. The women had sickly pale skin, long frizzy red locks, and wore a tattered white ball gown that almost seemed to glow the moonlight. Her face was half in shadow. It reminded Nancy of a blurred photograph with no features identifiable. Chapter 27. The two teens watched the strange girl run into a room at the far end of the hall before she peeked her head outside the door and giggled once more. Was this some kind of game to her? Nancy wondered. The woman waited until Nancy and Ned were within 5 feet of the door before slamming and locking it. "What just happened?" Ned asked, unsure of really had just happened. "I'm not quite sure. I suspect it may be a crook that comes and goes at will by the use of secret entrances," Nancy replied as she struggled to open the door. "Babe, the door is locked, so let's not waste your strength messing with it," Ned said as he put an arm around Nancy's waist, pulling her close. "If only we could have gotten a good look at her face. Then we could give the police a description," Nancy said as she rested her head on Ned's shoulder. She thought for a moment before saying, "Wait, I might have a hairpin we can use to pick the lock." A moment later she was already working on picking the lock. "Man, this lock must be ancient. It must be rusted, even I can't pick it." Nancy looked around the space before adding, "Come to think of it, this must the room that has been locked since Heather died, over 100 years ago. It's the only room on this floor I have not been in before," Ned said, reluctantly. "I hate to put things off, however, it seems we are just going to have to ask how to get inside in the morning." With nothing else left to try, all Nancy could do was nod her head in agreement. Ned took a hold of her hand and led them both back down to the second floor. "Something is not right about this house, Nancy, but I cannot put my finger on it," he stated. "I feel the same way about this case. This is the second time I have seen that strange girl," Nancy said as she shook her head in frustration. "We really need to get some rest, it is really late." "I will give you a tour in the morning of this place," Nancy replied with a long yawn before rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Ned took her hand in his as the two walked along the quiet, shadow-filled hallways. If anything ever happened to Nancy, Ned would never forgive himself for not being there to save her. The rest of the night went smoothly. Nancy was finally able to get some much-needed dreamless sleep while Ned dreamed of taking his college midterms while wearing only his underwear. Bess and George awoke at the crack of dawn. They were so curious that the girls could barely contain their excitement. So they quietly tiptoed across the hall to Nancy's room. Bess reached out and tried the doorknob to find it surprisingly unlocked. As they peered into the dark bedroom, they saw Nancy asleep, half hanging off the bed. Nancy's arms were positioned over her head like a starfish and all the pillows had ended up on the floor. "She sure does toss and turn a lot in her sleep. Nancy's arms are going to hurt so bad when she awakes," George commented quietly. Bess nodded in agreement, then said, "Do you think we should wake her? She did get in late last night, but I just don't think we should wait any longer to tell her the news." "Shush. It would be best to wait until she wakes up on her own," George suggested as she turned to leave the room. "Come on, Bess," the young girl whispered while pulling on Bess to go back to their room. Back in their room, Bess headed over to her small wooden vanity in the corner. "Might as well get my beauty treatments done," she said while unzipping the large floral cosmetic bag. The young girl loved to try new products and as a result had a large collection of beauty products. After washing her face next came the cold cream. As she was applying this, Bess commented, "There is no way I'm going to able to get back to sleep. We might as well find something quiet to do until breakfast." "But what, Bess? It is too early to go outside, and if we not careful someone might mistake us for a thief rummaging through the house," George said in between reading passages of the latest sports magazine. "How about we go take a look at that art gallery again? It does sound strange, but last night I dreamed of someone from one of the paintings. Call it a clue or whatever you will," Bess said while watching George's reaction in the mirror's reflection. "You and your strange dreams," George said as she shook her head in disbelief. Chapter 28. Bess and George made sure to quickly change into some loose jeans and cute tops before leaving to search for the art gallery. The two girls had learned that when working on a case with Nancy anything could happen, so they found it best to be dressed prepared. Flashlights we not needed because the halls were light with the early morning sun that shone through the many large windows. "This place must have been a ball for Miss Betty's son to play in when he was alive," Bess added as they wandered down the halls. "Are you sure you know the way, Bess? I get disoriented easily in a large building such as this," George asked, feeling worried. "I thought you were leading the way. You're the smart one," Bess responded as she began to chew on the ends of her hair from the stress. "Be quiet. There are people trying to sleep in here. Let's just keep walking along. This hall looks promising," George said while taking the lead. She always seemed to have to be the one to keep a cool head in most situations. Bess, on the other hand, had always been fickle and quick to stress. George often wondered how the blonde would do without her around. The two girls wandered to halls for a half an hour longer before they heard a feminine giggling sound. Looking around, the teens could see no one else in sight. So they just wrote it off as nothing. Then they began the walk back down the hall only to hear the giggle again. "That can't be my imagination," George said, scratching her head. "Who else would be up at the ungodly hour?" she asked while they attempted to follow the source of the sound. It led them for about 10 minutes before they stopped just outside a door. George reached out slowly to open it, however, Bess grabbed her arm. "No, George, do not open it. Someone must be in there. We should go back and get Ned to be safe. There is no time to waste. Whoever it is behind this door could be gone by the time we get back. Keep in mind, it could just be someone playing a prank on us." Both girls gulped hard as George tried to turn the doorknob again. Inside they found the painting gallery, however, it was a huge mess. Half of the many paintings lay on the floor and the chairs had been knocked over. The girls let out a gasp of surprise. A sound from the other side of the room quickly swayed their attention. There they found a grown man putting the painting of Heather in a bag. He was of average height, looked to be in his 40s, had a small frame, and wore a hat pulled down partly hinging his face. "Wait, who are you? What are you doing with that painting?" the girls demanded, suddenly seeing that all the years of being Nancy's friends must have rubbed off of them. In response, the man dashed towards them with the bag still in hand. The girls tried to hold their ground but saw that he was not backing down. So they moved out of the way just as he tried to push through them. "Let's chase him down," George commented when she realized what had just happened. "Help! Someone, please wake up. We are being robbed. Help!" Bess yelled while pounding on the doors. George noticed that the man walked with a slight limp which slowed him down slightly. Just when it seemed she was about to overtake him, he grabbed the edge of the rug that lay at the top of the stairway. Then the man waited until she reached it and then pulled it, making George fall down the stairs. She laid in a heap at the bottom of the stairwell. What a dirty trick. George exclaimed while trying to get back on her unsteady feet. She noted that strangely enough a cowbell could be heard off in the distance. She had taken a step forward to head back upstairs when Ned, Bess, and Nancy showed up and asked what had happened. After George gave a quick explanation, Nancy said that they had just seen an old junky car take off from here just a moment ago. It sounds like the same man we chased yesterday. Good to know that the cowbell I hid in the secret passage works to let us know when it is being used. Nancy explained to her friends. Bess, please make sure that George is not hurt badly. Also, try to explain to the staff what has happened. Nancy and I are going to look at the art gallery, Ned said while helping George to a sofa to rest. Meanwhile, Nancy called the police before going to investigate the crime scene to look for clues. Nancy had a gift for finding obscure details and could quite often find clues that even the cops overlooked. Back in the art gallery, everything was just as Bess described. To Nancy, it looked as if the place was hit by a tornado. Then out of the corner of her eye, she noticed that something on the floor was shining. Nancy walked over and picked it up. The item looked to be a fancy cigar case with the banker's name engraved on it. This was the clue Nancy was waiting for. Now she just needed to figure out how he was involved in this and why. Nancy had guessed that the crooks were after Heather's long-lost necklace but wondered if there more treasure hidden in the house. She recalled her father once telling her that, in years past, many families did not trust banks and would hide valuables on their own property. She glanced up as a shadow appeared and felt relieved to see Officer Jones walk in the door. The officer had brought notes written by her peers, with contact information on the stalker from earlier. We did find out a lot about the man that attacked you, like his full name and history. However, what I can share is very limited, Jones said as she handed Nancy the papers. I only wish we could do more to help you, but there are rules and regulations that must be followed, Jones added. When Nancy's gaze met Jones's, a look of sympathy could be seen in the officer's eyes. Every bit helps, thank you, Nancy responded as she skimmed through the papers. I only wish we catch this man soon. I hate to think what he is truly capable of. The officer quietly nodded in agreement. Ned walked up and asked, is there anything else we can do to help with this case? Only help clean up this mess, but I have your number if anything comes up. I will try to keep you posted, the cop said before turning to leave. Bess reached out to put her hand on Nancy's shoulder. I just wish there was more we could do for your sweet old aunt. She has been so good to us. Nancy turned to look Bess directly in the eye. I agree with you. I will try to think of something. We will be helping her when we stop these crooks and rest of the treasure, Ned replied. After breakfast, Nancy pulled her aunt aside. Aunt Betty, there is a locked room on the 3rd floor I need to ask about. Oh yes, Heather's old bedroom. No one has been in there for many years. Do you have any idea how long that room has been left undisturbed? I am pretty sure, the last time was when my husband was dared by his best friend over 50 years ago, said the old lady as she fixed herself a cup of hot Earl Grey tea. Is there any way I can get in the room? I would like to see what is in there, Nancy asked as she fidgeted back and forth in front of her aunt. She was quite anxious to get in there and see what was going on but did not want to tell her aunt all the details. The last thing her aunt needed was more to worry about. The key is in my safe, but I must tell that it is best to leave the past alone or it might haunt you, Aunt Betty said while she gave Nancy a questioning look. Chapter 29. Nancy sighed deeply. She was going to have to tell her aunt about the hunt for the necklace. She led them both into the small office and shut at the door. She didn't want any of the help to overhear this conversation. Nancy told her aunt only what she had to but purposely left out the details about the ghost and intruders. It is so kind of you to try and help find the lost treasure of this old mansion. If we could find it, I could keep my home and never have to hear from that wicked banker ever again. Aunt Betty said as she shook her fist in the air. "Wait for just a minute, dear, while I go get the key for you," she before getting up and strolling over to a large painting on the wall. She took it off the wall. Behind it was a small wall safe. Now what was that combination? The old woman asked herself before dialing it in. Reaching in, her grabbed a handful of old papers and then purple velvet pouch and then brought it over to Nancy. She took Nancy's hand and said, "Now do be careful from the stories I have heard. Heather doesn't like to have people invade her space. Her spirit needs to rest and must not be angered." Nancy opened the small pouch to find a dainty silver key on a chain, so she put it around her neck for safekeeping. "At least this way I will not lose it," she mused. After safety getting the antique door key, Nancy found Ned and convinced him to help investigate Heather's bedroom. As they reached the third floor, they noticed that the lights were off and it looked almost pitch dark up there. "It is awfully dark in here, especially since it is just a few minutes after noon," Ned commented while feeling along the textured walls until he found a light switch. The pair of teens stood just outside the locked door, unsure of what they might find inside. Taking off the necklace and getting the key took a moment before Nancy could try to unlock the door. Her hands trembled with fear of what awaited them on the other side of that door. Ned, noticing this, took her other hand in his and gently squeezed. She carefully put the key into the lock and tried to unlock it. To their surprise, the key was stuck and would not turn or come back out. "Is this Heather's way of keeping us out?" Ned asked while staring at his girlfriend. "I am sure it must be stuck from not being used in so long. I just wish I would have thought to bring some oil to lubricate the interworkings of this lock," Nancy said as she continued to fidget with the key, desperately trying to free it. Finally, she gestured towards the door for Ned to try his luck with it. Still, it would not turn. So he shook it a little, before trying again. Thankfully this time to turn, and the door opened with a loud squeak. "Wow, this place does look like a ghost's bedroom," Ned commented as they walked into the long-forgotten space. It had once been a grand room filled a handsome four-steed redwood bed, Victorian furniture, lace curtains, exotic potted plants, many ball gowns, and the joy that was sweet Heather. Now the wallpaper hung half off the dingy walls, the curtains were mere shreds of its former self, the bed had fallen in, and the plants were long dead, leaving behind empty pots. Nancy went over to the old-style Victorian vanity but found nothing but the sad remains of antique makeup and broken perfume bottles. Next, they searched the dresser, which was filled with the remains of an old rat's nest not fit to be touched. What is next?" Ned questioned while tapping his foot on the hardwood floors. "Wait, Ned, do you hear that?" Nancy said as she abandoned her search through an old hope chest. "Hear what, Nance?" "I really don't think there is anything here. The family must have gone all through here years ago looking for that blasted necklace," he said before sitting himself down on the cast-iron vanity bench. "Right here where you were tapping your foot, it sounded hollow," Nancy said, pointing to the floorboards. "Give me your pocket knife, we might have found a long-lost secret compartment." Nancy tapped her foot along the floor to see how large the opening was, then looked for spaces in between the floorboards. Carefully using the knife to pry up the boards, Nancy took out a small section to find space underneath. The space was full of years' worth of dirt and dust. Right in the middle of this small space was a wooden ornate box. Nancy turned this over in her hands, studying it carefully. "How do you open this?" she wondered. Just then they turned when they heard the door slam shut and then locked from the other side. "Oh no, we are trapped in here," Nancy exclaimed before dropping the box to the floor just as a creepy evil female laugh came from the other side. "Now you shall never leave here. You shall die in the same room I did, you brats," said a raspy voice before the women turned to rush away. Ned fiddled with the door while Nancy continued to rummage through the cubby. There was no way she was going to let those crooks get a hold of this new discovery. There was not much else in there except for a small ivory cross and an old family Bible. Nancy leaned over to retrieve the small wooden box when she noticed a piece had come loose. The piece of wood came off easily to reveal a set of 4 number keys like on an antique typewriter. Must be a sort of puzzle box. I've seen the like before but none made quite like this ornate, she said absent-mindedly while pushing the keys. Nance, don't you think our freedom is more important right now? We will starve to death in here if we can't get out. Ned said as he slid down to the bottom of the door in defeat. Nancy leaned down and gently held his hand in hers before adding, Ned, I need you to trust me, we are going to be all right. I really do think we should investigate this room thoroughly while we have the chance. In the future, we might not be able to get back in here if need be. Chapter 30. The teens were trapped in Heather's old bedroom. Nancy, ever the detective, insisted on thoroughly investigating the room. However, after an hour's search nothing new came to light. There has to be a way to escape. I have gotten myself out of far worse situations than this before, Nancy said as she paced the floor. The balcony is far too high up to try to jump from and we don't have anything we could use to climb down. Ned lay across the floor, feeling tired and too hungry to think clearly. His eyes were fixed directly in front of him, staring at the fireplace. Nancy, what is wrong with the clock on the mantel? Ned asked as he gestured in its direction. Nancy stopped pacing and turned to look at her boyfriend. What do you mean it is just an old clock? Nothing special about it that I noticed, why? I think we need to take a better look at it, Ned said as he got up from the floor and walked over to it. Come take a look at this. It has 3 hands with the smallest one painted gold. He tried to pick it only to find that it was anchored to the mantel. Nancy took a good look at the clock. She noticed that every time a hand was moved it caused another to move in the opposite direction. After playing with it for quite a while she finally got all hands to line up on the number 12. Then a strange rumbling sound could have heard from the fireplace. The teens bent down to look at the fireplace. To their surprise the back wall had slid back revealing a secret passage. Ned looked to his girl before saying, I don't like the looks of this. Anything could be in there and there is no guarantee that this leads to a way out. Perhaps we should just stay here until someone comes to help us. Nancy rolled her eyes in response. Come on, where is your sense of adventure? My sense of adventure is overruled by my worry for you, he said with a smug look on his handsome face. Do what you want, but I am taking a look inside this passageway, with or without you, Nancy said as she started to go in. How come trouble follows you wherever you go? Just blessed, I guess. She disappeared into the darkness. Ned stood there for a moment in thought before grabbing a candlestick from a nearby table and following after her. The other side was dark and Nancy was glad when Ned appeared beside her to hold her hand. I brought a candle that should be useful, Ned said as he pulled a book of matches from his pocket and lit the wick. The space filled with the warm glow from the candle illumining the hidden space room. You ought to know by now that I always have your back, the young man said as he pulled Nancy close and kissed her on the forehead. The teens looked behind them when the same rattling sound from before could be heard, signaling that the doorway in the fireplace had closed. We have no choice but to move forward now, Nancy added somberly. Ned gulped hard before adding, we need to get a move on and not waste any time. In response, Nancy flashed him an amused smile before turning to lead the way. I have been meaning to ask you, why so many old buildings have hidden passages? Was it all that common back then or just something for the elite? Ned asked. For many reasons, I have heard tales of them being used by spies. Some were used as an alternative way to escape in times of war. Other households stored alcohol and tobacco within them to keep it safe from theft, and others used them as a hideout in times of trouble, Nancy said as they came across a stage block of wood on the wall. Why was that put there? She said before touching it. The block of wood was locked with a small metal latch. Once unlocked it swung open revealing a pair of painted eyeballs on it. Nancy peeked through the holes in the wall to see a young woman dressed in a long white ball gown in the music room. The style of her gown and hair suggested a bygone romantic era. She sat at the window peering out, as if in a trance. There must be a painting on the other side of this wall, and this is a peek hole. I wonder if anyone has been using this to spy on us or Aunt Betty. Nancy whispered. Just then the girl in the music room turned and stared right at Nancy. Nancy tried to hold her eyes still to not be discovered. The girl in the ball gown walked to the center of the room, all the while staring at Nancy. There she stood for a minute before letting out an impish giggle and smiling ear to ear. Then all of a sudden, the girl came running at Nancy as if to attack. Chapter 31. The young woman rushed towards Nancy, causing the teen to slam the hatch shut just before the figure reached her. To Nancy's surprise, however, there was no impact to be heard. No one should have been able to stop in time to keep from hitting the wall. I have no idea what just happened, Nancy commented, peeking out of the hatch once more. The room was now empty but somehow still managed to send a chill down the girl's spine. Nancy, what happened? You are shaking like a leaf, Ned asked after he grabbed her hand, offering comfort. This all has to be some kind of trick. It just has to be, she mumbled while sliding down to the floor. Tell me what is wrong. I'm here to help you, Nancy. What did you see? He asked. When Nancy didn't respond, Ned went to open the peephole. However, Nancy stopped him by grabbing his arm. She leaned forward and whispered, "Trust me, just let this topic go. Something was very off in there and it's best left alone." What are you talking about? I'm sure you just need some fresh air. Let's keep moving and see what is ahead, Ned said as he tried to help Nancy get up. It upset him to see her acting this way. The young couple walked along the passage looking for an exit until they hit a dead end. What in the world? Who in their right mind builds a passage with no way out? Darn it! Ned exclaimed as he kicked the wall. I believe you are right. Who would build a hidden passageway with no exit? We might need to think out of the box to figure this out, Nancy said while holding her chin, deep in thought. She studied the empty room more closely. Wait, Ned. See that handle on the ceiling? It must lead up to the attic, she exclaimed excitedly. It's too high up. You are going to have to sit on my shoulders to reach it. Don't worry, my sweet, I will never let you go, Ned said with a wink and a grin, causing Nancy to giggle. Then the Ned bent down to allow Nancy to get onto his broad shoulders. Nancy reached for the handle but her long slender fingers barely touched its rusted surface. Ned, please stand on your tiptoes, I need another few inches to reach it. Ned grunted, but he did as Nancy asked. With the help of the extra few inches of height, she grabbed the handle firmly and pulled hard. There was a loud booming sound before a folded wooden ladder came down from the ceiling. Nancy grabbed the ladder, saying, "We must be very careful, these stairs look half-rotted." As they came out from the darkness, they found themselves in an old musty attic. On the other side of the room stood a large weathered door. The teens rushed toward it, eager to gain their freedom. Once there, they found out that the door was unlocked and the knob turned easily, but the door was warped and would not open. Ned puffed out his chest, an action that reminded Nancy of a gorilla. "I have got this, just step back, my lady," he said before body slamming the door. The old door came crashing down easily, sending splinters and pieces all over the floor. Thus the couple was granted passage back into the livable areas of the home. Wow, that was amazing. Now let's get down to the kitchen and get some food in us before we faint, Nancy said as she took Ned's arm and led the way. On the way down they ran into Bess and George, who had been looking all over for them. As they sat down for lunch, they recounted what had happened. The mere thought of another intruder inside the house, locking her friends up, made Bess shudder in fear. As Nancy ate a dainty finger sandwich, she once more gazed at the puzzle box. She hoped that the password to the puzzle was some sort of date. That way all Nancy had to do was try the ones from the old letters she had discovered before. From her pocket, she pulled out a small notebook and started trying the dates that were written down inside. After a few tries, Nancy grew irritated, so she handed the box over to Bess, to let her try a few combinations. As luck would have it, the very first date Bess tried opened the box. "Thank God that was it," Bess said excitedly when the year of Heather's planned wedding ended up being the key to opening the box. Inside she found an antique ornate diary. It had a mix of roses and swirls designs all over it. As Nancy flipped through it, she discovered all the words were not faded and perfectly readable. Chapter 32. Nancy was still sitting at the kitchen table looking through the diary when snatched the book from her. Nancy looked up at her friend in surprise. Bess's amused look did not falter as she said, "Jace has been acting really wild. Yesterday, he went around howling at girls, had the nerve to try to put his arm around George, and has been making inappropriate sexual comments at us girls." She sat down and put her arm around George's shoulders. "Nancy, you will never believe this, but George went off at him something terrible. You have never seen anything like it." "Oh come on Bess, it was not that dramatic. The guy was a jerk who needed to be put in his place. It is that simple." George tried to comment. She told him off, shook her fist at him, and made such an evil face that she had had him speechless. "Wow, wish I could have seen it," Ned added, between bites of his small ranch-covered salad. "Ned, sounds like you sure did get a behind-the-scenes tour of this grand old mansion," George said with a sly grin. "Or should I say a behind-the-walls tour? I am going to have to pass on touring the rest of this place. I would much rather get some fresh air after being trapped like that," Ned replied, walking up behind Nancy and wrapping his arms around her. "My love, where do you want to go today?" "I am not really sure. Do you have any ideas?" Nancy replied. "What about a picnic then? Carter told me about this amazing waterfall that is close to a huge field of wildflowers, not far out of town." Ned whispered in her ear, sending a shiver down her spine. "But what about my friends? It would be rude to take off without them," she asked, gesturing to her friends seated at the table. Bess cleared her throat and said, "Oh, don't worry about me. I have another date with Carter tonight. He is taking me out for pizza and then to dance out of town." George had said something about wanting to explore the town a little more. I'm sure Carter would be glad to give her a lift. After a few minutes, the butler entered the room to find all three girls laughing their heads off and Ned just sitting there awkwardly silent and blushing. He quirked one eyebrow before saying, "Miss Nancy, you have a call from a woman named Miss Jones from the police department." Nancy looked up and replied, "Thank you for telling me." Looking at her friends, she added, "I will be right back and will just be down in the downstairs office." Down in the office, Nancy answered the phone, "Miss Drew, I have some puzzling news for you. We did find evidence of the dog pack and their tracks were followed, only to find that they were loaded onto a truck and taken elsewhere," said the woman in a tired voice. "What about the stalker?" Nancy asked. "After much digging, we were able to find some files on him. It seems he is wanted for pickpocketing and a small home robbery that happened just over a year ago. We also ran the plate number you gave me. It came back stating that it was from a Model T car, registered in Riverdale. It seems that the plates were switched at some time in an effort to avoid the police. We are in the process of contacting the plates' true owners at the moment." "Have you learned anything about the robbery?" Nancy asked as she sat down and took up a pen and paper to take notes. "Unfortunately, we have not, however, I promise to will you back when something does turn up." "I am sorry Nancy, but I have someone here at the office for a meeting. I am going to have to let you go now," replied Jones. Thank you so much and I hope to hear from you soon, Nancy added just before hanging up. An hour later, Nancy and Ned arrived at the edge of the woods. The sun was intense and made their cheeks begin to freckle and sunburn. The bright morning light was blinding, making Nancy regret not bringing her sunglasses. Ned pulled the basket from the back seat of the car and began to lead Nancy down a rough trail. There was greenery everywhere with many wildflowers scattered along the edge of the trail. This place was pretty and full of life. As Nancy and Ned walked along they heard a bird cry out and spotted a white-tailed hank flying overhead with what looked at a rabbit in its mighty claws. Not long after, they spotted an old faded wooden sign that read, "Lovers Falls Up Ahead," with an arrow pointing the way. It will not be too much longer. Carter told me that this used to be a popular spot many years ago but has been forgotten by most. Ned explained. Then how does he know about it? Nancy asked out of curiously. The way I understand it that it is from when his grandfather used to bring him up here quite often as a kid. Apparently there is a small pond about 20 minutes away that is great for fishing. Ned said as he helped Nancy over a rotten fallen log. Oh, Ned, I can hear the falls from here. Nancy exclaimed with excitement as she rushed ahead of her boyfriend. Once there, its beauty took her breath away. Before her was a large waterfall with a huge blue pool below it. All around the edge of the water stood amazing twisting trees that looked to be over 100 years old. Queen's lace, red honeysuckles, buttercups, and many other types of wildflowers dotted the lovely landscape like gemstones on a necklace. Ned watched Nancy quietly with a slight grin on his handsome face. He loved to see Nancy this excited and happy. She was like a small child again, seemingly about to burst with excitement. This side of her was adorable and warmed his heart. Ned called Nancy over to a nice shady spot under a large hickory tree. They unpacked the picnic and ate the sandwiches, brownies, and Honey-Crisp apples Nancy had packed with care. After that, they went over to the edge of the water and put their feet in the fresh cool water. It was as if all their cares disappeared and the calm just took over. Nancy pulled her bag over and dug for a mint, but instead she stumbled upon the photos they had taken at the church instead. How could she be so stupid to forget they had these? She carefully looked through the many photos. She had gotten many fine ones of Ned and herself. Nancy sighed as she stared at a photo of Ned. He just such an amazing guy and Nancy still had such a big crush on him. The next photo though made their breath catch in her throat. It was a picture of the man who had chased her. At least she could now show the others what he looked like. Chapter 33. After Nancy had shared the picture of a man with Ned, she found herself sitting on the lush green grass enjoying the fresh air. The two loved birds. Nancy and Ned stole glances at each other and held hands. To Nancy, this felt blissful. After a moment, Ned looked down at her, who was resting on his lap with her eyes closed. Ned lightly shook her before asking, "Have the photos developed from our trip into the woods?" Nancy blinked her eyes sleepily and yawned. "Yeah, I have them right here in my purse," she said while pulling them out. Ned put his arm around her to pull her close as they looked at the photos. "This is a really good photo of you," Nancy said wearing a cheesy grin. "You are such a hottie, my love." Ned took hold of the photo to have a closer look. "If you say so. I think I look little pissed off though." As Ned looked through the photos, something caught his attention. Then he added, in the corner of the photo, "I think I see something in the bushes." Nancy's eyes went wide, and she spoke in almost a whisper. "Ned, this looks just like the girl from the house. The very same one, whom we chased into the locked room." Ned sat there silent for a moment as he studied the picture, before saying, "I think you are right. The image is blurry, but it sure does look like her." Nancy scratched her head. "I guess we will just have to turn this new evidence into the police when we get back to town." I do not think there is anything else we can do with it for now. Just then, out of the corner of her eye, Nancy noticed a small bright green hummingbird darting around. "Be quiet," she said as she gestured towards the small bird. They marveled at the tiny bird darted from flower to flower drinking nectar as it hovered in mid-air. Not long after, another hummingbird appeared and started to call the other one. "Are they a mated pair?" Ned asked, but before Nancy could answer, the two birds flew away. "That is strange," she commented, as the birds disappeared out of view behind the nearby waterfall. "What is, Nancy?" Ned asked. "Come on, Ned, my gut tells me that there is something off about that waterfall. I want to take a closer look at it," Nancy replied as she took off in that direction. Ned just scrubbed his wide shoulders and got to his feet to follow his girl. Nancy had an eye for anything special and made life an adventure for those all around her. This was just one of the many things he loved about her. The waterfall became louder as they came closer to it. Once the teens got within a few feet of the waterfall, they noticed a small entrance hidden behind its curtain of water. Carefully the two squeezed through to find a large space behind it. It was about the size of an advantage living room. It was dark and damp inside. Nancy spotted the missing hummingbird nearby, darting around before it flew away again. It was a beautiful sight to look through the waterfall and onto the rest of nature's beauty. This place was truly amazing, but Nancy knew they would have to leave soon. She wished to visit this place again one day with her camera. They explored the rest of the hidden area and found old rusted metal jugs and barrels with tubes coming out. Must have been used to make moonshine during the probation times before it was abandoned. Ned mused as he leaned against a bare wall. "Yeah, I have heard stories of an old-timer making the moonshine up in the hills and hiding it in usual places," Nancy said before taking Ned's hand in hers and heading back out into the open. Ned was getting ready to leave when Nancy begged him to explore the area just a little bit more before leaving. She remembered seeing an old bridge on the hike earlier that looked very interesting. There was no way Nancy could leave before getting a better look at it. It turned out to be more of a ruin than anything else, but was still beautiful in a unique way. Nancy wondered how old it was and if Heather and her love had once met upon this very bridge many years ago. An hour later, Ned drove along the dirt country road at a slow pace. Nancy had pulled out the old diary they had found hidden in Heather's old bedroom. She began going through, starting on the last entry. It spoke of the early effects of scarlet fever and Heather missing her lover. He had not come back yet, and she worried about him. A lot of the other pages spoke of her father's many house guests and servants. She seemed very depressed in many of the later entries. Nancy continued to read the book and came upon a vague poem. It spoke vaguely of love symbol and a walk along with a budding garden in the moonlight with my love. It also said, if only Monty knew his collection was the place. So, the symbol was either a wedding ring or a necklace. But was the garden once at her aunt's mansion? Who was this Monty of which Heather spoke? There were still a few loose ends to tie up here. Chapter 34. As they arrived at the mansion, the couple were greeted at the door by George. Bess is very upset. She overheard the help talking about some ghost girl. They said she haunts this hall in search of her long-lost love. She is described as being lovely, with long red hair in curls, and wearing a white dress. Others say that she looks like a creepy zombie. George explained. This is not good, Nancy said as she led the way into an office to talk in private. Nancy knew that she was going to have to find a way to fix this. She thought for a moment before going into detail. It's true that this place does have a legend about a ghost that has been passed down for generations. George gave Nancy a questioning look. Why did you not share this with us before coming here? Nancy paced the floor for a bit before replying, I only recently learned of the fable myself. Both Ned and I have seen a ghost-like woman, however, I am sure that she is just a thief trying to scare everyone away. Ned chucked for a moment. Nance, you are making this sound like an episode of Scooby-Doo. Nancy rolled her eyes at him in response before continuing, I have a hunch that she might be working for the banker but have not been able to flesh out all the details. But why did you wait so long to tell me? Do you not trust me? George questioned with her hands on her hips. No, I just did not want to scare Bess. You know how sensitive she can be at times. While nodding in agreement, George said, remember, that I'm here for you if you need any help. When turning to leave the room she added, I will go explain everything to Bess and try to calm her down. Not long after, Nancy went to speak with her aunt once more. There she explained in detail about the dairy and asked about the garden and Monty. Let me think for a moment. When you get to be my age it takes a little while to recall things, my dear, said the old woman as she arranged some flowers in a glass vase. I recall my mother once said that the Butterfly Rosen Gardens were once called the Wandsworth Estate and owned by a distant relative. If I am remembering correctly, the family's original name was Monty before all the male descents died out. It is still there after all these years. Wow, I never expected that. Nancy exclaimed with great surprise. Nancy knew the necklace just had to hidden somewhere out there but did not share this information freely. The last thing she needed was the help overhearing and causing trouble. Yes, I hear that the gardens are very beautiful and the grounds are quite large. I haven't been out there in decades but have fond memories of visiting there, said the old woman. Could you tell me how to get there? I would love to visit with my friends. Nancy asked as she pulled out a notepad and pen to take notes. Of course, anything for you, dear, replied the woman. She then gave Nancy the directions on how to get there. The garden was out of town about 2 hours away. Nancy had a hunch that the verse that spoke of moonlight might be the key to finding the necklace. After dinner they piled into Ned's car and drive out to the Butterfly Rosen Gardens. Bess had not gotten back yet from her date with Carter, so it was just the three of them going this time. Just before they left, Nancy received a call from the police alerting her that the banker had been caught drunk driving. Yes. Finally, the police came through, exclaimed the girl after she was off the phone. Now she just had to catch the ghost girl and the stalker. The ride there was very quiet, causing the group to feel a bit tense. They arrived at the destination just as the sun was beginning to set. Before them was an impressive garden with a big iron gate all around it. Luckily, the teens found it unlocked and easily entered the grounds. Inside there was an old-fashioned greenhouse, an English garden, and in the back was a high hedge maze. In between, there were many beds of varied flowers and bushes. Let's split up. Ned, you take the greenhouse, George the hedge maze area, and I will take the English garden. Nancy instructed. What are we looking for? Asked Ned. Anything that seems strange, special, or out of place, Nancy replied. Once inside the greenhouse, Ned found it to be full of all sorts of exotic flowers including pitcher plants, fly traps, and many small fruit trees. He also noticed tons of live butterflies of every color imaginable that fluttered about from plant to plant. George carried the flashlight in hand ready to use it as needed. She found this hedge maze to be confusing and easy to get lost in. It had so many dead ends and seemingly endless paths to take. Her head felt like it was spinning as she dropped to the ground and held her head. Just then, there was some rustling nearby. The girl turned her head quickly to see nothing but a blue bird sitting on top of one of the hedges. I can't let my nerves get to me. This is so unlike me, she thought. Nancy, on the other hand, was bored out of her mind. So far she had seen nothing unusual. It was also very quiet. Almost too quiet, like the calm before a storm. She went over to a nearby iron bench and sat down, leaned back, and sighed. She was so sure that they would find something useful here tonight. This was so disappointing. And half an hour later, George was still lost in the hedge maze. Was she ever going to find the way out? Little did she know that the exit was only 10 feet away from her. From somewhere nearby she heard giggling. "What is that? Nancy, is that you? I am lost in here, can you help me find my way out?" she asked. There was no answer, but the giggling continued, as a chill crept up George's spine. She felt like something was not right here. Was there something dark at play? She decided to follow the sound in hopes of finding the way out. However, the laughter seemed to lead her deeper and deeper into the maze. Meanwhile, Ned and Nancy had met up and found a pathway leading to part of the garden that had not noticed before. This area had a small pond with a bridge over it and many flowering trees. Beyond that was a statue of young women with a base made of stone blocks. They noticed that many of the trees had lovers' names carved into the bark. Could these carvings be a clue? Ned asked as they paused for a moment. Then they heard a loud scream. Back in the hedge maze, George had found a strange woman floating a few feet off the ground. Mist surrounded the figure, making it impossible to get a good look at her. George went wide-eyed at the sight of this and froze in fright. The women slowly started to spin around and moved closer to the teen. As the women came into view, the mist cleared just enough to let George see her face. Her skin was grayish-white, her eyes pure white with no pupil, and there was dark red blooding dripping from the mouth. George screamed as the women tried to grab her. The teen ran off into the maze trying to escape and find her friends. "You will die here. The treasure is mine," fumed the women as she chased after George. Chapter 35. Ned and Nancy arrived outside the maze. Nancy noticed a heavily foggy area beside the hedge maze and dashed over to investigate. There, hidden just behind some greenery, was a huge metal tub which contained water and dry ice. This combination of materials was creating a thick ghost-like mist. Once again, the duo heard someone scream and exited the cloud of fog, only to witness George come running out of the maze. To their horror, a ghostly figure holding a butcher knife emerged right after their friend. The couple quickly formed a rescue plan before dashing off purposefully. George felt hopeless because she knew it was only a matter of time before the creature, for the lack of a better word, caught up to her. She glanced back, only to realize that her follower was now carrying a long knife. She swallowed hard and pleaded, "Oh my lord, how am I going to survive? I have my whole life ahead of me." Then from the corner of her eye, something caught her attention. There was Nancy standing beside the glass greenhouse. She seemed to be pointing inside the structure before disappearing behind some foliage. George decided to trust her friend and ran into the building, not knowing what awaited. Meanwhile, Ned had already entered the greenhouse from the back entrance and wedged the door shut. As he crept along, a strange sound like someone digging could be heard. He stayed in the shadows while venturing deeper into the foliage. After following the sound back to the source, Ned spotted the same man that had been stalking Nancy. He skillfully crept up a few feet behind the man. Ned silently waited for an opportunity to attack. It came when there was a loud scream of terror from the other side of the greenhouse, causing the man digging to jump in fright. Ned took this chance to grab the stranger from behind and pinned him to the ground. The teen took off his leather belt and tied the man's hands tightly, before hurrying off to help the girls. On the other side of the greenhouse, Nancy had managed to take a shortcut and get ahead of George. The young sleuth had found a really long gardening hose and tied one end of it to a bench. Nancy then hid on the other side of the path and waited. It was not long before George came along and crossed in front of her. Nancy reacted quickly by pulling on the hose and tripping the creature. As it fell to the ground, the knife flew out the creature's hands and ended up wedged in a nearby tree trunk. George felt exhausted, however, she could not resist helping subdue the criminal. Nancy leaped on the creature, putting it into a choking hold as George checked the creature's clothing, making sure it had no more weapons. Ned walked up a few minutes later and burst into laughter after seeing what had happened. "You finally are a firecracker. I need to remember never to make you angry, my love," he said to Nancy. He wasted no time and ran over to a nearby convenience store and called the police for help. Officer Jones arrived on the scene to handcuff both of the criminals, before asking for a full explanation. Nancy explained, to the best of her ability, what had happened. She also shared the theory about the suspects working for the banker. He had been determined to get that mansion no matter what. They must have heard the legend of the lost pigeon blood necklace and thought they could find it. Why else would they try to scare us off and steal the painting of Heather? Nancy argued. Later on, at the police station, the man who had been captured admitted to all of the crimes, claiming to just be a hired hand. The banker was the brains behind all of this. He explained that the man had once been childhood friends with Aunt Betty's son. They would often have play dates in the mansion and discovered the secret rooms. When the banker had recently learned of the legend of the lost necklace, he was sure it was hidden within the walls of the home. So when Aunt Betty refused to sell him the house, he hired the man in custody to do his dirty work. Later on, when he learned of Miss Drew's arrival, the banker convinced his own daughter to dress as the ghost and try to scare people off. Nancy and her friends sat on a bench in the garden as they watched the cops wrap things up. "But one thing still bothers me." "Wait, what is that?" George asked as she pointed towards something shining on the other end of the garden. Upon closer inspection, the light was coming from an angel statue, like the one Nancy had found outside the old ruined church. It held a blue glass orb which reflected the moonlight. There was a large stone wall behind it, with some of the mortar darker color from the rest. "Ned, can I borrow your pocket knife for a moment?" Nancy asked. With this she dug at the dark mortar and removed the stone behind it, to discover a small hollow. She put her arm inside and felt around. Nancy's hand grazed a small metal box covered in dirt. After freeing it from the wall and wiping it clean, the item turned out to be an antique jewelry box with the name, Heather, engraved upon it. They all held their breath as Nancy opened it. Inside was a set of gold wedding bands and a small velvet pouch. Taking the fabric bag into her hands, Nancy opened it to find the most beautiful necklace the teen had ever seen. It was Heather's pigeon blood necklace that was lost so many years ago. The gem's base color was a deep red, but when the moonlight shone upon it, the stone appeared to royal purple. That night, Bess and Aunt Betty meet the group at the front door. The police had called but only told them a very vague explanation. Nancy led them into the office and locked the door. First, she explained what had happened with the banker, then she took Aunt Betty's hand in hers and said, "I have something that is yours." From her pocket, she pulled out the small pouch and gave it to her aunt. The old woman looked quite puzzled and hesitated a moment before opening it. Once she realized what she held in her aged hands, the old woman fainted. With this priceless necklace in hand, Aunt Betty was able to pay off all the debts and stay in her own home. The group of teens left 2 days after finding the necklace but would never forget the grand adventure they had experienced. Bess was so taken with Carter that they started going steady and quite often traveled to see each other. As they drove away, Nancy stopped at the great iron gate and looked back at the grand old home. If only walls could talk, she thought. Just then something caught their eye. They could see the figure of a girl in a long flowing dress up on Heather's balcony. "Wasn't that room still locked when we left?" asked George. They started at the girl who was waving to them as if saying, "Goodbye my friends. I will miss you." A chill went down their spines as the girl seemingly faded into nothingness before their very eyes. "What are you waiting for, Nancy? Hit the gas," Bess commanded. They took off like a rocket as the car speeded down the road heading back home. Pure terror shone in their eyes, none of the girls could bring themselves to look back at the haunted mansion. The end. The story continued. In case you did not already know, the book you have just finished reading is only part 1 of the revamped Nancy Drew mystery series. Below is the summary for Book 2, The Secret of Mermaid Cove. Please visit my homepage on Wattpad to find all of my stories. Nancy Drew takes off on a trip for a much-needed relaxing vacation. Instead, she's greeted by a strange gift shop, filled with hundreds of strange antiquities. Among them is a hidden mermaid figurine in a bottle, and quickly learns of its ancient legend, tinted with long-lost treasure. With her curiosity sparked, Nancy goes out investigating but soon finds out there is more to this old legend than meets the eye. She must work quickly to unravel the age-old clues and outsmart some modern-day pirates.